What's up everybody, welcome. This is the entire Ancient Mysteries Iceberg. In this video we'll be going over mysteries covering everything from ancient Greek zombies to legendary cities that were lost to time, all the way to the mystery behind Jesus' foreskin. Trust me, sounds weird, but it'll make sense the further we get into this. Real quick before the video starts, in case you don't have time for this entire video, I know it's probably well over 2 hours, I do have a playlist down below with different episodes. Basically this entire video just separated into smaller episodes, so in case you want to watch that. And I also have the Lost Locations Iceberg link down below too. Okay, without further ado, I just want to say thank you all for watching. Make sure that you comment your favorite entry, your favorite mystery, or if you think that I missed something, make sure you let me know and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. But other than that, thank you guys again. I'll catch you at the end of this. Alright, so first up, we're starting at level 3, like I said, tier 3. First up on this one is ancient automatons. The ancient Greeks were thought to have provided the earliest examples of automata. We know that their engineering skills were further developed than the rest of the world at that time, and to them the idea of building mechanical machines that mimicked like living beings, creatures, basically people, robots, kind of things like that, was somewhat of an obsession to them because of like all the stuff in their mythology and all this. Like I said, mythology provides us with a great number of stories regarding amazing mechanical objects and people. Many of these are no doubt just what they are, like a myth, you know what I mean? So a lot of them are made up, you gotta take them mostly with a grain of salt. But we do know that as a result of their advanced abilities, they were capable of devising machines powered by steam and water, as well as contraptions worked by human-made levers, basically. So human-operated levers, they had a bunch of different kind of machinery. The famous Greek mathematician Hero of Alexandria devised a water basin that featured metal birds which sang, along with a mechanical owl that would turn its head around to look at the birds and make them go quiet. So that's pretty crazy that they had that all the way back in ancient Greece, you know what I mean? And one of his most well-known creations was a wind wheel, which is possibly the oldest example of man harnessing the power of wind without it actually being like on a water kind of wheel. Yeah, basically that just shows that automata or like robots and mechanical stuff like this has always been getting made, especially like way back in ancient Greece. They kind of had this obsession with it, so pretty dope. Moving on to the next thing though. The Gundestrup Cauldron. So the Gundestrup Cauldron is a richly decorated silver vessel thought to date somewhere between 200 BC and 300 AD. The cauldron is the largest known example of European Iron Age silverwork. Its diameter is about 69 centimeters, which is 27 inches. Its height is about 42 centimeters, which is about 17 inches. It was found dismantled with the other pieces stacked inside the base in 1891. It was found in a peat bog near the hamlet of Gundestrup in the Ars parish of Himmerland, Denmark. And basically the cauldron is not complete. It now consists of a round cup-shaped bottom making the lower part of the cauldron, usually called the base plate, above which are 5 interior plates and 7 exterior ones. A missing 8th exterior plate would be needed to actually encircle the cauldron, but it's missing, and only 2 sections of a rounded rim at the top of the cauldron survived. So the rest of this thing was kind of broken apart and just, you know, was never found. The base plate is mostly smooth and undecorated inside and out. Apart from a decorated round medallion in the center of the interior, all other plates are heavily decorated with repousse work. It's hammered from beneath to push out the silver, so it's basically hammered from the inside out to kind of push this. Other techniques were used to add detail, and there's extensive gilding and some use of inlaid pieces of glass for the eyes of the figure. So when you actually look at this thing is pretty crazy, you know what I mean? Because even nowadays people don't make good quality shit, you know? Moving on. Next up is the Long Man of Wilmington. So the Long Man of Wilmington, or the Wilmington Giant, is this hill figure on the steep slopes of Windover Hill near Wilmington in East Sussex, England. Locally, the figure was once called the Green Man, and basically this figure is 235 feet or 72 meters tall. It holds these 2 staves and is designed to look in proportion when viewed from below. So basically when you're looking at it from below, you can actually see the entire figure of a person. The origin of the Long Man remains unclear. An early suggestion, sometimes stated to be a local tradition, was that the Long Man was cut by monks from a nearby Wilmington priory and represented a pilgrim. So this is what people were locally thinking. But this was not widely believed by antiquarians, who felt that monks were unlikely to have created an unclothed figure Until fairly recently, the Long Man was commonly asserted to have been cut in the Neolithic period, primarily due to the presence of a long barrow nearby, or given an Iron Age attribution based on a perceived similarity to other hill figures. So basically there's a bunch of other hill figures like this around, not this area, but specifically around, and they all came from the Iron Age, so people were just kind of assuming it came from the same age. But a 2003 archaeological investigation has shown that the figure may have been cut as early in like the modern era, basically around the 16th or 17th century. And basically the modern figure is formed from white painted breeze blocks and lime mortar. So pretty dope. I mean, if you go here, let me know if you've ever seen it. It's not that crazy, but moving on to the next one. All right, up next is Darius the Mede. So Darius the Mede is mentioned in the book of Daniel as being king of Babylon in between Belshazzar and Cyrus the Great. But he is not known to history, and no additional king can be placed in between these two known figures. Most scholars view this guy as just a literary fiction, basically just like a made-up figure. But some have tried to harmonize the book of Daniel with history by identifying him with various known figures, notably Cyrus or Gobryas, who was the general who was the first to enter Babylon when it fell to the Persians in 539 BC. In the story of Daniel in the lion's den, which is in the book of Daniel chapter 6, Daniel had continued to serve at the royal court under Darius and has been raised to high office. His jealous rivals plot his downfall, tricking Darius into issuing a decree that no prayers should be addressed to any god or man but to Darius himself, on pain of death. Daniel continues to pray to the God of Israel, and Darius, although deeply distressed, must condemn him to be thrown into the lion's den because he edicts of the Medes and Persians cannot be altered. At daybreak, the king hurries to the place, and Daniel tells him that his God sent an angel to save him. Darius commands that those who had conspired against Daniel should be thrown to the lions in his place along with their wives and children. And that's basically all that's mentioned of Darius. So nobody really knows if he's actually a real person or if he was just like a placeholder for an actual figure throughout history. But he's only mentioned here, and there is no actual king that can be placed throughout history in between Belshazzar and Cyrus the Great. So maybe he's real, maybe he wasn't, maybe he was just, a made-up name for somebody else. But world may never know, my guy. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Next up is the Black Sea Flood. So the Black Sea Deluge is the best known of three hypothetical flood scenarios proposed for the late Quaternary history of the Black Sea. It is one of these two flood scenarios which propose a rapid, even catastrophic rise in sea level during the late Quaternary. In 1997, William Ryan, Walter Pittman, Petko Dimitrov, and their colleagues first published the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. They proposed that a catastrophic inflow of Mediterranean seawater into the Black Sea freshwater lake occurred about 7,600 years ago, or around 5,600 BC, and proposed the early Holocene Black Sea flood scenarios described an event which would have profoundly affected prehistoric settlements in Eastern Europe and adjacent parts of Asia, and possibly was the basis for the oral story concerning Noah's flood. So basically, this is like the hypothesis of why people think that the story of like Noah's Ark and that whole great flood was actually written down. People propose that it was this actual Black Sea flooding from Mediterranean sea waters. Criticisms of the deluge hypothesis focus on the magnitude and pace of the water level rise in the Black Sea. With enough moderation of these features, catastrophe hypothesis is voided. So basically, when you look at the actual rise in sea levels over time, the catastrophe hypothesis is basically just like null and void. It's not really worth it. However, a few key points should be noted. Since the ending of the last glacial period, the global sea level has risen some 120 meters, or about 390 feet. And the flood hypothesis hinges on the geomorphology of Bosmorphus since the end of the glacial age. The Black Sea area has been sealed off and reconnected many times during the last 500,000 years. So basically, the Black Sea has been, they've had like land bridges connecting and disconnecting due to rise in sea levels, and basically like rise and falls of sea levels. So it's been connected to the ocean multiple times, and then it's also been locked off from the ocean multiple times over the last 500,000 years. So who really knows? But anyways, I'm not sitting too long on that one. We moving on to the next. All right, so up next are the Vinča symbols. So the Vinča symbols are also sometimes known as the Dagū script. Basically, these are a set of untranslated symbols from the Neolithic era that basically were found on a ton of different artifacts from the time, from the Vinča culture of Central Europe and Southeastern Europe. And basically, to give you a time frame, the Neolithic era is around 7000 BC to 1700 BC. Just to give you like a quick little time frame. Anyways, whether this is one of the earliest writing systems or simply symbols of some sort is like highly disputed. Basically, people don't really know. They have sometimes been described as pre-writing or proto-writing. And in 1875, archaeological excavations directed by the Hungarian archaeologist Sofia Torma at Tordos, which is present-day Romania, unearthed a cache of objects inscribed with previously unknown symbols. Now, in 1908, a similar cache was found during excavations directed by Serbian archaeologist Mijoje Vasic in Vinča, which is a suburb of Belgrade, which is now in Serbia. And basically, over 150 Vinča symbol sites have been identified in Serbia alone. But many, including Vinča itself, have not been fully excavated. So a lot of these sites just basically they found them, never really dug too deep into them. They actually like aren't fully excavated. Thus, the culture of the whole area is called the Vinča culture, and the symbols are often known as the Vinča/Turdas script, or also the Dagū scripts, like I said before. And basically, the discovery of the Tataria tablets in Romania by a team directed by Nicole Vlasa in 1961 revived this entire debate. Vlasa believes the inscriptions to be pictographs, and other items found at the site of the discovery were subsequently radiocarbon dated to be before 4000 BC. So super old, definitely in the Neolithic era, definitely way earlier than the 1700 BC, which was 1300 years earlier than the day that Vlasa expected, basically. So this was even older than they thought it was going to be, and the predating the writing systems of the Sumerians and the Minoans. However, the circumstances of their discovery and authenticity of the tablets themselves is disputed. So this may be the oldest form of writing or pictography, symbols, whatever, besides like super old caveman stuff, but the authenticity of like the tablets where they were actually found on is just still highly debated today. And yeah, there hasn't really been too many updates since then, so who knows. But we're moving on to the next one. All right, so this one is a weird one. Ancient Greek zombies. All right, so basically, research conducted by an archaeologist named Carrie Solowski Weaver of the University of Pittsburgh has shown that the zombie craze is not a new phenomenon, but one with evidence going back more than 2,000 years. According to a report on her work in Live Science, Solowski Weaver studied 2 burials from a necropolis in a Greek settlement on the island of Sicily that she considered peculiar because they hold what she believes to be the remains of revenants, which is basically a zombie, which is pretty fucked up. Anyways, the ancient Greeks believed that certain dead bodies could reanimate, and that to keep them in their graves, they had to be ritually killed or trapped inside some way, basically trapped inside this little necropolis or grave, whatever, such as pinning the body down with amphimorpha fragments or large stones, as was done at Passo Minaro. Now, there's not a ton of information on this, which I hate, because this is like the craziest one on here so far, to be honest, and there's not much. That's literally all I could find. So if you can find some more information, please let me know. I will do a whole other video on this, because ancient Greek zombies, because what the fuck, that's crazy. But we moving on to the next one, because I couldn't find that much on it. Anyways, I just had to do that because it's fire. That's dope, you feel me? So moving on. All right, so up next is Hermes Trismegistus. Basically, this is a legendary Hellenistic figure that originated as a syncretic combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. He is the purported writer of the Hermetica, which is a widely diverse series of ancient and medieval texts that lay the basis of various philosophical systems known as Hermeticism. The wisdom attributed to this figure in antiquity combined a knowledge of both the material and the spiritual world, which rendered the writings attributed to him of great relevance to those who were interested in an interrelationship between the material world and the divine. And basically, the figure of Hermes Trismegistus can also be found in both Islamic and Baha'i In those traditions, Hermes Trismegistus has been associated with the prophet Idris. And yeah, that's pretty dope. I think it's kind of weird that they combine two gods. Like, I don't really understand that. Anyways, that's Hermes Trismegistus for you. We're moving on to the next thing. Okay, so up next is Mithras and Mithraism. I'm not going to go too deep into them because basically Mithraism is like this low-key kind of religion that was really short-lived. Anyways, Mithra is the Iranian god of the sun, justice, contract, and war in pre-Zoroastrian Iran. Mithraism is just the worship of Mithra. And basically, it was really pronounced in the Roman Empire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And basically, this deity was honored as the patron of loyalty to the emperor. And after the acceptance of Christianity by the Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, Mithraism basically just kind of went away after that. It like declined super fast because everybody was getting hip to Christianity. So if you are interested in that, then go look into it yourself. It was like this entire long story, and I'm trying to keep these like relatively short. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. Don't be too mad. All right, up next is Ploutonium at Hierapolis. So Pluto's gate was this Ploutonion, and a Ploutonion is basically this religious site that was dedicated to the god Pluto. It was located in the ancient city of Hierapolis, which is now in today's Turkey, and the exact age of this site is unknown still. So we don't know the exact age of this exact site, but Hierapolis itself was founded around the year 190 by the king of Pergamum, which was Eumenes II at the time. And basically this religious site, or this Ploutonion, was built on top of a cave which emits toxic gas, hence why it was used as like this ritual passage to the underworld, or why they all thought that this had this like super crazy powers. They used to do a ton of ritual animal sacrifices here. They would basically throw the animals into the cave, and then they would tie these ropes to them before they did it, and they would yank them out a couple minutes after, you know, hoping it was a sacrifice. Now, the cave itself was just like a really tiny cave. It was only small enough for about one person to enter. You go in through this little fenced-in entrance, and basically beyond that, you would go down these stairs. And once you were in there, basically, you would already feel this like carbon dioxide gas kind of coming in. Basically, it was all caused by underground geological activities at the time. They clearly didn't know that. They thought this was all the god Pluto kind of fucking with them. And basically, behind this chamber was this cleft in the rock, and through that all this toxic gas was spilling out. And basically, because it was this whole ritual site, and because, you know, the culture at the time and everything, they figured that this gas was sent by Pluto, who was the god of the underworld, to basically, who knows, kill them, whatever they thought at the time. But anyways, moving on to the next one. I just thought that one was pretty interesting because it was basically just like these people just constantly going near this poison gas cave that's killing them. I don't know. Crazy. I bet you if they saw that nowadays, they'd be like, damn, we're fucking stupid, but whatever. Moving on. All right, so up next is the Antikythera Mechanism. So basically, this mechanism was an ancient Greek mechanical device used to calculate and display information about astronomical phenomena. The Antikythera Mechanism had the first known set of scientific dials or scales, and its importance was recognized when radiographic images showed that the remaining fragments contained nearly 30 gear wheels. No other geared mechanism of such complexity was even like existed until medieval cathedral clocks were built almost a whole millennium later. And basically, the remains of this ancient computer are now on display in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and they were recovered in 1901 from the wreck of a trading ship that sank in the first half of the 1st century near the island of Antikythera in the Mediterranean Sea. And basically, the manufacture date around it is given to be around 100 BCE, which is pretty fucking old, and give or take that 30 years. So somewhere around that area. Could either be 30 years earlier, 30 years later, somewhere around 100 BC though. So that's that one. All right, so up next is the lost mine of Ophir. Having ruled on or around 970 BC, the legendary King Solomon is arguably one of the most recognizable characters from within the pages of the Old Testament. He was the 3rd king of Israel. Solomon was a renowned ruler that oversaw growth from a single state into a venerable superpower of the Middle East in biblical times. During his near 4-decade regency, he had a reputation of wisdom and clear judgment. But King Solomon had another aspect to his legend: his immense wealth from gold that historians say came from the lost mine of Ophir. This brings us to one of the greatest mysteries of all times that nobody can seem to agree on. Where was Ophir? Basically, no one knows where this place is. By today's standards, Solomon was reputed to have a personal fortune in excess of 60 trillion. So, I mean, people are pissed at billionaires because this dude was pushing 60 trillion by today's standards. And that's all in gold. Pretty much mostly pure gold, okay? He owned about 500 tons of gold. King Solomon's temple, which was built in the mid-10th century, was beckoned in gold. At his palace, builders constructed his throne from a combination of gold and other precious metals, including ivory. A gold footstool rested at the base. So this dude was putting his feet up on gold, because like I can't even fathom this. What? Leading up to his golden throne, a dozen life-size replicas of lions formed a guard of honor on 6 steps. Like, bro, this man was living lavish. Crazy. Anyways, scholars believe that Solomon worked with another regent, Phoenician king Hiram, to acquire vast quantities of gold. Hiram ruled the region known at the time as Tyre, which was believed to be located in nowadays Lebanon. And basically, a lot of people think there's a few possible locations of where people think the actual mine of Ophir is. This includes Zimbabwe in Africa, somewhere in the Philippines, and people have also thought somewhere in Brazil, but obviously none are confirmed. So who knows? Whoever finds that, bro, let me in on that. 60 trillion, cuz you do not need that much, and crazy. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Okay, so most of you guys have probably heard of Stonehenge, but up next we have Woodhenge. So Woodhenge is a Neolithic timber monument built in about 2500 BC, around the same time as actually Stonehenge was built, and it's only 2 miles away to the northeast from Stonehenge. It was formed of 6 concentric ovals of standing posts surrounded by a bank and a ditch, which were built to align with the summer solstice sunrise. The site was discovered by aerial photography in 1925 and was excavated in 1926 through 27 by Ben and Maud Cunnington, who marked the positions of the wooden posts with these concrete pillars for visitors for whenever they came. And basically, when Woodhenge was first excavated, many objects were found, including grooved ware pottery, carved chalk objects, antler picks, animal bones, flint tools, and fragments of human remains, and at least 1 human cremation. Now, basically, a lot of people figured that this place was a ceremonial site, unlike Stonehenge, because they didn't really find too many things when they actually had done excavations and stuff on Stonehenge. Although here they had found 2 people buried at the site. One was around like a 2 or 3 year old baby that was buried near the center. And another one was a young man that was buried in the ditch. And also they found the cremation and a few fragments of the human remains. And the burial from the ditch has been dated somewhere around 1760 to 1670 BC, which was during the early Bronze Age. So yeah, it was basically like a religious thing, you know what I mean? Something for spiritual reasons. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Alright, so up next is the Anunnaki. So the Sumerians lived in Mesopotamia, which is present-day Iran and Iraq, and they lived in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers from about 4500 to 1750 BC. Now, despite them being an ancient civilization, their reign was marked by numerous impressive technological advancements. For example, these people invented the plow. They invented cuneiform, which is basically one of the earliest forms of human writing. They also invented a method of keeping track of time, which is basically what we still do today, you know what I mean? We still use that, we still keep track of time. But basically, according to these people, they did not do it alone. They owed almost all of their historic breakthroughs to a group of gods called the Anunnaki. And they're telling the Anunnaki mostly descended from An, which is a supreme deity who could control both the fate of human kings and his fellow gods. They left evidence of their beliefs in ancient texts, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest writings in human history. Much of what we know about the Sumerian civilizations comes from clues that they left behind in thousands of clay tablets. Now, in 1976, a scholar named Zachariah Sitchman wrote a book called The 12th Planet, which shared translations of 14 of these tablets related to Enki, a child of the Sumerian supreme deity, An. Alright, so Enki is the son, basically, or child of An, which is the basically supreme deity of the Anunnaki themselves. Alright, his book claimed that the Sumerians believed that the Anunnaki came from a far-off planet called Nibiru, and according to Stitchman, Nibiru has elongated orbit of 3,600 years. At one point, this planet passed close by to Earth, and its people, the Anunnaki, decided to make contact with our world about 500,000 years ago. And since then, basically, you know what I mean, they continuously kind of helped out civilizations and stuff like that. Couldn't really figure out where they thought they went after this. And it's kind of hard because the Sumerians and all this, basically, obviously they're not around to tell us what they think, and we can only really get what we can, like, get off these tablets. So it's pretty hard, but I think this shit's super interesting. I might make another video just like completely breaking down the Anunnaki and all this stuff, because there's a ton of shit that goes into these. Like, this is like the basis of a lot of conspiracies and a lot of weird shit. So might do that at some point, but I'm moving on to the next thing anyway. So alright, so up next is Newgrange. Basically, Newgrange is a 5,200-year-old passage tomb located in the Boyne Valley in Ireland's ancient east. Newgrange was built by Stone Age farmers. Basically, the mound is about 85 meters or 279 feet in diameter and 13 meters or about 43 feet high. And it covers an area of about 1 acre, so it's pretty big. Anyways, a passage leads into the chamber with these 3 alcoves, and the passage and the chamber are aligned with the rising sun on the mornings around the winter solstice. And basically, Newgrange itself is surrounded by 97 large stones called curbstones, some of which are engraved with these megalithic art. And the most striking is this entrance stone right here. Doesn't really have anything like that stands out. It's more, it kind of looks like swirls and stuff like that, but cool enough. Anyways, archaeologists classify Newgrange as a passage tomb. However, Newgrange is now recognized to be much more than a passage tomb, more like an ancient temple. Basically, it's a place of astrological, spiritual, religious, and ceremonial importance to the area. Much as present-day cathedrals are places of prestige and worship where dignitaries may be laid to rest, same thing with this place. Basically, it's like a church. So if you're going to have funerals and stuff like that, Newgrange is where you would have gone 5,200 years ago. So there's that. Pretty short one, but moving on to the next one. Up next is the Roman dodecahedron. So a Roman dodecahedron, or a Gallo-Roman dodecahedron, is this small hollow object made of a copper alloy which has been cast into a regular dodecahedron shape, which is about 12 flat pentagonal faces, and each face having a circular hole of varying diameter in the middle, and the holes are connecting to this hollow center. No mentions of dodecahedrons have been found in any contemporary accounts or pictures of this time. Speculative uses include as survey instruments for estimating distances to or sizes of distant objects, or devices of determining optimal sowing date for winter grain. Basically, people just don't know exactly what it was used for. They're just kind of guessing at this point.
What the hell is that?
Several dodecahedron were found in coin hoards, providing evidence that the owners either considered them valuable objects or believed that their only use was connected with the coins. And it has also been suggested that they may have been religious artifacts or even fortune-telling devices. The later speculation is based on the fact that most examples have been found in Gallo-Roman sites, and smaller dodecahedrons with the same features, meaning the holes and the knobs on them, have been made from gold, and they were found in Southeast Asia along the Maritime Silk Road, and they have been used for decorative purposes. And the earliest items appear to be of these like Roman descent. So still, they're honestly like still a mystery. Like, basically nobody really knows exactly what they were used for. Either they're used for these coins, they were just valuable objects used for trade, decorative stuff. People don't know if they're like something to be able to tell the distance of how big something is from certain spaces or whatever. Really, it's just a big mystery, and I don't got time to look too much into it. So we're moving on. If you know, let me know. But as far as I can tell, I couldn't figure it out. So moving on. All right, so this next one is also a really short one. This is the bent pyramid of Sneferu. The first pyramid to be built in Dashur was the pyramid that we now know as the bent pyramid of Sneferu. The lower courses of the pyramid were built at an angle of 54 to 55 degrees, but the upper courses at a lower angle of about 43 degrees, giving it the unique shape which has led to its modern name. When it was constructed, originally it was called Sneferu in the Shining South, or Sneferu is Shining, because it was laid and polished in Tumra limestone. And basically, a lot of people just think that the reason why it was actually bent was because middle of the construction, basically they realized that the structure wasn't going to hold it, and it already started to kind of like bend and break inwards. So they just kind of went with it and ended up making it bent like this. That's a lot of it that I could figure out, because some people tried to say that this was supposed to be a new style, but he had built other ones after this and they came out like regular shaped. So a lot more people just assumed that this was a mistake and that they just said, fuck it, we'll finish it, whatever, we're moving on to the next one. Anyways, not that interesting, but we're moving on to the last one from this tier, so let's get it. Okay, so finishing up this level on this iceberg is Pleiades across various civilizations. So this one, it's honestly pretty simple. It's basically just this constellation, Pleiades, which is about these 7 sisters or 6 stars basically, and they've been in multiple stories across multiple civilizations, across multiple times. People even think that basically they've been being seen for about 100,000 years now. So this is just basically saying that it's been across a ton of cultures. Basically, many cultures around the world refer to Pleiades as the 7 sisters, and also tell quite similar stories about them. In Greek mythology, the Pleiades were the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas. He was forced to hold up the sky for eternity and was therefore unable to protect his daughters. To save the sisters from being, we're gonna say, graped by the hunter Orion, which is also another constellation, the constellation Orion, Zeus transformed them into stars. And basically a similar story to that one was found among the Aboriginal people across Australia. And in many Australian Aboriginal cultures, the Pleiades are a group of young girls and are often associated with the sacred women of ceremonies and stories. The Pleiades are also important as an element of the Aborigine calendars and astronomy. And for several groups, their first rising at dawn marks the start of winter. So basically, like I said, these like constellations just have been super important across tons of different civilizations, across a bunch of different time and all that stuff. But anyway. All right, so up first is Andara's footprints. So the Andara temple is the Iron Age Syro-Hittil temple, noted for its similarities to Solomon's temple, and it's also known as the first temple in the Hebrews Bible. It is located in Africa, technically Syria. It's located in a village called Andara, hence the name. And basically, the excavator for this place, his name was Ali Abu Asaf, and he said that this place existed from 1300 BC until around 740 BC, and it remained basically unchanged that whole entire time during Solomon's temple's building and everything. So this thing actually predates Solomon's temple. The main mystery about this thing is inside, like the actual place, inside the actual temple itself, there are these like 2 big footprints. There's actually about 4, but there's a pair, and they're each about 1 meter long, which is about 3 feet long, followed by another single footprint that was carved into like the floor beyond the first 2, and then another one marking the threshold that the deities like basically had gotten into the temple. And basically a lot of people that see this stuff basically conject that it was an unidentified creature with immense clawed features to be able to actually like etch its like feet into the thing. And the inference, like the main consensus about this thing, is that the right footprint seen on the threshold, which is spaced about 10 meters or 30 feet from the first footprint, could be from a human or a god or whatever the fuck you want to call it. This thing would be about 20 meters tall, or that's about 60 feet, bro. Like, that's fucking huge. So it's super debated on what this actually is. If it's, I mean, obviously it's real, you know what I mean? It's an indentation into the floors and it was excavated. But it's also been noted that the deities in all of the Andara temple release have shoes with toes curled up, which is basically like supposedly the source of the footprints, because that's how they look. Anyways, moving on to the next one. All right, so up next are Dogū. So Dogū, the word itself literally means earthen figure, and basically these are these small like humanoid and animal figurines that were made during the later part of the Jomon period in Japan. And the Jomon period basically lasted a fucking long time. It was from 14,000 to 400 BC, so big stretch of time. But these Dogūs were specifically made during this time, and by like the next period, which is the Yaoi period, it was already basically phased out. They were no longer being made. So all these things that were being found are from this time period. Around now, there are approximately like somewhere between 15,000 and 18,000 that have been found of these actual Dogūs, and the purpose of them remains unknown. So nobody knows what these were actually made for, and they're not to be mixed up with the Hawana funerary objects, which are like basically like these little like figures that they also make, but they're for like funerals and like, you know what I mean, ceremonial type of things. Not to get confused with that. So people really don't know what these are actually supposed to be. They're made out of clay and are small, typically 10 to 30 centimeters high. Most of the figurines appear to be modeled as female and have big eyes, small waist, and wide hips. They're considered by many to be representative of goddesses, and many have large abdomens, which can be associated with like pregnancy and everything. According to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, these figurines suggest an association with fertility and shamanistic rituals. Due to in part to the enigmatic nature of the figurines, there have been numerous theories regarding the ornate appearance, with some speculating that the physical appearance is connected with the suits and equipment of modern day astronauts. Basically, because if you look at some of these things, they have these little goggles on, and I guess like people are associating that with astronaut kind of like space suits because they look like a little weird. But there's actually like these Himalayan group of people that also say that those things have the same exact kind of glasses that they use for when they would go like through the snow and everything to not get snow blindness. It's like these really little slit glasses, and they basically say that some of these little figurines have the same exact thing on them. So pretty crazy. But anyways, there's a bunch of discrepancies in the varieties of the Dogū itself, with only a portion of these things actually having these like little goggle like things. Most are just like basically brought up by ancient alien kind of people. And anyways, the main thing is no one really knows what these things are still made for, so we're moving on to the next one. All right, so up next is the Nebra Sky Disc. So the Nebra Sky Disc is this bronze disc that's about 30 centimeters in diameter and about 5 pounds in weight. It has this bluish green patina to it, and it's inlaid with these gold symbols. Now, the symbols on this disc are generally interpreted to be the sun or a full moon, a lunar crescent, stars, and Pleiades, like these 7 stars. Remember this, because these like 7 stars, Pleiades, stretches across a ton of different civilizations, and it's gonna pop up probably more than these 2 times, to be honest. So just remember this for next time. Anyways, let me get back to what I was saying. It has 2 golden arcs along the sides, interpreted to be the mark of the angle between the solstices that were added later, not like originally when it was first created, I guess. And a final addition was another arc at the bottom with internal parallel lines. The disc has been attributed to a site in present-day Germany near Nebra, and was originally dated by archaeologists to be around 1600 BC, based on the provenance provided by the looters who found it. Researchers initially suggested that the disc was an artifact of the Bronze Age Unistis culture, although a later dating found it to be during the Iron Age had also been proposed. If the Bronze Age dating is correct, the Nebra Sky Disc features the oldest concrete depictions of the cosmos yet known from anywhere else in the world. So basically, this is the oldest thing that shows the universe and the stars. And anyways, so if this is actually from the Bronze Age, this is the oldest thing that depicts that ever found, ever. So anyways, and in June 2013, it was included in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register and termed one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. If, however, the Iron Age dating is sustained, that title could go to the star clock in a graves wall painting found in Thebes, Egypt, which is dated around 1463 BC. So all depends on if this thing was actually made originally in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, if it is the oldest known so far, basically. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Alright, so up next is Silphium. So Silphium is basically this unidentified plant that was used in classical antiquity as a seasoning, a perfume, an aphrodisiac, and as medicine. It was also used by the ancient Greeks and Romans as a contraceptive. And basically, this thing was this really essential trade item from the ancient North African city of Cyrene, and it was so critical to this city's basically economy that most of their coins had a picture of this plant on it. Now, the valuable product from this plant was actually the resin that came out of it. It was super important in classical antiquity, as evidenced by Egyptians and Knossos Minoans developing a specific glyph to represent the Silphium plant. It was used widely by most ancient Mediterranean cultures. The Romans, who mentioned the plant in poems and songs, considered it worth its weight in silver coins, basically, or denarii. Anyways, or even gold. So this thing was super expensive, and the resin was definitely worth it to people. Legend said that it was a gift from the god Apollo. Exact identity of Silphium is unclear. It is commonly believed to be a now extinct form of the genus Furla, and perhaps a variety of a giant fennel. The extinct plants Margogia gumifera, all these plants basically have been suggested as Silphium, what it was, but no one can really tell for sure. That was a long-winded way of saying that, basically. My bad. Anyways, another plant, Asafoetida, was used as a cheaper substitute for Silphium and had similar enough qualities that Romans, including the geographer Strabo, used the same word to describe both. Many medicinal uses were ascribed to the plant. It was said that it could be used to treat a cough, a sore throat, fever, indigestion, aches and pains, warts, and all kinds of maladies. Anyways, I'm sick of fucking words up for that one, so we're moving on to the next one. My bad. Alright, so up next are the stone spheres in Costa Rica. So the stone spheres of Costa Rica are an assortment of over 300 petrospheres in Costa Rica on the Diques Delta in the Isla de Cano. Locally, they are known as bolas de pedra, or literally just stone balls. So there you go. The spheres are commonly attributed to the extinct Dacais culture, and they are sometimes referred to as the Dacais spheres. And basically, these are the best known sphere sculptures in the Istmo-Colombian area. They are thought to have been placed in lines along the approach of the houses of the chiefs, but their exact significance remains unknown. So basically, nobody really knows what these things are for. You can picture almost like a garden, like leading up. You know how gardens, they have like those rows of the rocks and everything, or you have a stone path. You can picture that leading up to like the chiefs' houses and everything like that. That is what people are assuming these are for, but yet again, nobody really knows. Anyways, the Palmar Sur archaeological excavations are a series of excavations of a site located in the southern portion of the country known as the Diques Delta, and have centered on a site known as Finca 6 or Farm 6. The archaeological findings date back to the Aguas Buenas period, or around 300 to 800 CE, and Chirique period, which is around 800 to 1500. So anywhere from 300 to 1500 CE is basically what they've been finding in this archaeological dig and on Farm 6. Anyways, in June 2014, the pre-Columbian chieftain settlements with the stone spheres of the Diques was added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites. In July 2014, a project which has been proposed back in 2011 to declare the spheres a national symbol of the country was finally approved. So now these things are actually a symbol of Costa Rica, a national symbol. Numerous myths actually surround these stones themselves, which is probably why it's on these mysteries, such as a bunch of people from around the area think that they came from Atlantis, or that they were somehow made like by something like along those same lines. Basically, some local legends state that the native inhabitants had access to a potion able to soften the rocks and like be able to mend them however they want. However, most of the spheres were created from gabbaro, or an acidic resistant igneous rock, and the cosmology of the Bribri, which is shared by the Capabares and other American ancestral groups. The stone spheres are Tara's cannonballs, or Tara and the Traucle, who is the god of thunder. Basically used to use this giant blowpipe to shoot balls at Xerxes, who was the god of winds and hurricane. So you can imagine some god basically spitting spitballs but they're these giant fucking rocks. That's what they're going for. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Alright, so up next is Tutankhamun's Iron Dagger. By the way, this whole thing, I'm gonna just call him King Tut because I'm gonna mess up his name at some point. King Tut's dagger is an iron-bladed dagger from the tomb of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, who reigned from 1334 to 1325 BC. As the blade composition and homogeneity closely correlate with the meteorite composition and homogeneity, the material for the blade is determined to have originated by way of meteoric landing. The dagger is currently displayed at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and basically since the 1960s, the high nickel content in the blade has been accepted as an indication that this thing came from a meteorite. A more recent study published in June 2016, basically from like an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer analysis, shows that the blade's composition is mostly iron and 11% nickel and 0.6% cobalt. At the timing of King Tut's mummification in approximately 1323 BC, which was around the Bronze Age, iron smelting and manufacture was rare, and iron objects were only used for artistic, ornamental, ritual, gift-giving, and ceremonial purposes, as well as pigmentation. Hence, iron during this age was more valuable or precious than gold. So basically, the iron in this thing, they were not putting this much iron in this blade back then. Besides the fact that he was actually a king. So it makes a lot of sense. Basically, people are saying that this iron dagger is not, it's more an iron dagger. It's not actually a meteorite, which a lot of people had assumed for mad long, basically, you know what I mean, since the 60s. So now we know that this actually makes sense because iron artifacts were given to like royalty back then during the Bronze Age and everything. So yeah, it makes sense, you know what I mean. Kid died when he was mad young. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. All right, so up next, what were the Vimanas? So Vimana are mythological flying palaces or chariots described in Hindu texts or Sanskrit epics. And basically the Sanskrit word Vimana literally means measuring out or traversing, or having been measured out. Monier Williams defines Vimana as a car or chariot of the gods, any self-moving aerial car, sometimes serving as a seat or throne, sometimes self-moving and carrying its occupant through the air. Other descriptions make the Vimana more like a house or a palace, basically. So it's kind of either or. It's basically a flying crib or a chariot that carries the gods. Best way to describe it, to be honest. Short, sweet, and simple. Anyway, it's found mostly, like I said, in Hindu texts or Sanskrit epics, and basically, yeah, that's really all. That's what nobody knows what the Vimanas actually were. Probably some ancient alien type shits, or that's what I would assume, honestly. They probably saw like a UFO back then or something, right? You know, what else do you think of fucking flying palaces, dog? Like, we didn't have planes back then, so who knows, man. But anyways, short and sweet, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so up next is the Baghdad Battery. So the Baghdad Battery is a name to a set of 3 artifacts which were found together: a ceramic pot, a tube of copper, and a rod of iron. All right, it was discovered in present-day Kajut Rabu, which is in Iraq. It was found close to Ctesiphon, which is the capital of the Parthian, and basically it is believed to have dated from somewhere around 150 BC to 650 AD. Somewhere around this time is believed when this thing was made. All right. Anyways, its origin and purpose remain unclear. It was hypothesized by Wilhelm Koenig, the director of the National Museum of Iraq, that the object functioned as a galvanic cell, possibly used for electroplating or some kind of electrotherapy, which is crazy when you just think of the years I just said, because 150 BC to 650 AD is where this thing is timed to have come from. And they're doing electrotherapy back then. Fucked up. Anyways, but there's no electroplated object known from this period, and the claims are near universally rejected by archaeologists. An alternative explanation is that it functioned as a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, since the artifacts consist of terracotta pot approximately 6 inches tall with a 38 millimeter, which is about like a 1.5 inch mouth, containing a cylinder made out of a rolled copper sheet which houses a single iron rod. At the top, the iron rod is isolated from the copper by bitmuin with plugs or stoppers, and both rod and cylinder fit snugly inside the opening of the jar. The copper cylinder is not watertight, so if the jar is filled with liquid, this would surround the iron as it would surround the iron too. Basically, it would pour and basically would surround both. Anyways, the artifact had been exposed to a bunch of weather and had suffered a ton of corrosion when it was found. And the artifacts are similar to other objects believed to be storage vessels for sacred scrolls from nearby Seleucia in the Tigris. Since these vessels were exposed to the elements, it is possible that any papyrus or parchment inside completely rotted away, so they don't know if there were actual scrolls in this thing since none were found. They just found the iron rod and everything like that. And yeah, basically there was no acidic residue. Basically there's no acidic organic residue in there, so they have no clue. Basically it looks like it could be used for, like, you know what I mean, some type of battery, but it's basically universally rejected. Nobody actually believes that shit. And yeah, I'm moving on to the next one. So finishing up this half is the Olmec colossal heads. Anyways, the Olmec colossal heads are stone representations of human heads sculpted from large basalt boulders. They range in height from 1.17 to 3.4 meters, which is about 3.8 feet to around 11 feet tall. The heads date from at least 900 BC and are distinctive features of the Olmec civilization of ancient Mesoamerica. All of them portray mature individuals with fleshy cheeks, flat noses, and slightly crossed eyes. Their physical characteristics correspond to a type that is still common among the inhabitants of Tabasco and Veracruz. The backs of the monuments are often flat, and the boulders were brought from the Sierra de los Tuxtlas Mountains of Veracruz. Basically, these things were dragged a fucking long way to get to where they were at and be there. All right, they were actually over 150 kilometers they were dragged. All right, which is around 93 miles, which would require a great deal of fucking effort if you don't realize that. These things are huge, bro. These giant monuments are thought to represent portraits of powerful individual Olmec leaders. Each of the known examples has a distinctive headdress on it, which makes people think that it was like a leader or like a chief position. It was who they're carving out. And the heads were variously arranged in lines or groups at major Olmec centers, but the method and logistics used to transport the stones to the site still are unclear. So they have no clue how they got these things here. Like I said, they dragged these things for 93 miles over here, so I don't know how they did it. I'm hoping not on their backs, bro. That shit would be crazy. They all display distinctive headgear, and one theory is that these were worn as protective helmets, maybe worn for war or to take part in a ceremonial Mesoamerican ball game, which, if you watch I think that was the Lost Locations thing, I talked about El Dorado. If you watch the El Dorado movie from, I think it's Disney or Paramount, they played this game that the Mesoamericans used to play.
This is impossible.
That's the game that these people are thinking that this is a protective headwear for. Anyways, most of the colossal heads were sculpted from spherical boulders, but two from San Lorenzo were recarved from massive stone thrones. An additional monument at Tacalic Abaj in Guatemala is a throne that may have been carved from a colossal head. So basically, these things are all spread out all over the place. And yeah, that's really all I have for this one. Basically, the smallest one of these things weighs 6 tons, and the largest weigh around 40 to 50 tons. And basically, like I said, the whole mystery is that nobody knows how they actually got these things to these locations. Over 93 miles, they are not dragging these things on their back. I hope not. But okay, up first is the Joseph Smith papyri. So the Joseph Smith papyri, or the JSP for short, are these Egyptian funerary papyrus fragments from ancient Thebes that are dated between 300 and 100 BC, which, along with 4 mummies, were once owned by Joseph Smith, who is the founder of the Latter-day Saint movements, which is also the Mormons. I'm pretty sure they're like basically the exact same thing. So if I call them the Mormons, then you already know. Anyways, Smith said that the papyrus contained the records of the ancient patriarchs Abraham and Joseph, and in 1842 Smith published what he said was the first part of the translation of the Book of Abraham. A translation of the Book of Joseph was never published by Smith, though. After Smith's death, the papyri passed through several hands. They were presumed to have reached the Museum of Chicago and were subsequently destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. However, not all of the fragments were burned, and some were eventually acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1947. The museum knew the importance of the papyri to the Church of basically the Latter-day Saints, and in 1966 they actually reached out to the leaders of the church and notified them that they had these things in their collection. And in 1967, basically the Mormons, they got their like papyri back, and since then basically it sparked a bunch of new interest in it, and since then has been like heavily studied, debated. There's a whole bunch of stuff with this. So truthfully, if you believe it, you believe it. If you're a Mormon, let me know. Only thing I know about Mormons is honestly from the Family Guy episode, if you guys have ever seen that.
Well, I wish I took your advice and picked a new religion. I'm gonna be a Mormon.
A Mormon? Are you sure?
Come on, nailing a different wife every night, that's a no-brainer.
So other than that, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, up next is supposed to be the Lost Labyrinth of Egypt, but to be honest guys, this one has so much information that this could be a 15-20 minute video in itself, and I don't really want to like cheap out on any information because it's kind of like all important to the labyrinth itself. So I think I'm just going to do that and make my own separate video on this. So we're going to skip this one, we're going to go right to the next one. Simple as that. Okay, so up next is the Tollund Man. So the Tollund Man, he basically died in somewhere around 405 to 380 BC, so just keep that in mind. Anyways, like I was saying, the Tollund Man is a naturally mummified corpse of a man who lived during the 5th century BC, during the period characterized in Scandinavia as the pre-Roman Iron Age. He was found in 1950, preserved as a bog body near Sikkelberg on the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. The man's physical features were so well preserved that he was mistaken for a recent murder victim. 12 years before his discovery, another bog body, Elling woman, was found in the same exact bog. And basically, the cause of death has been determined as by hanging. Scholars believe the man was a human sacrifice rather than an executed criminal because of the way his body was arranged, and basically his eyes and mouth were closed. So they figured it was like kind of like a whole ritualistic thing. And bog body is basically, it's kind of like, you know what I mean, in the name, these people were just like, they died and basically they got mummified because they died in a bog and like all the water and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Anyways, moving on to the next one. Okay, up next is the mystery of the Varna gold. So in the 1970s, archaeologists in Bulgaria stumbled upon a vast Copper Age necropolis from the 5th millennium BC containing the oldest golden artifacts ever discovered near the modern day city of Varna. But it was not until they actually reached grave number 43 that they realized the actual significance of what they just found. Inside burial number 43, they unearthed the remains of a high status male buried with unfathomable riches. More gold was found within this one burial than in the rest of the like entire planet basically at that time, okay? Nobody had more gold than this guy. He can even flex that if he wanted to. Anyways, most people have heard of the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, which are all noted for being the earliest civilizations to feature urbanization, organized administration, and cultural innovation. But very few have heard of the mysterious civilization that emerged on the shores of lakes near the Black Sea some 7,000 years ago. This thing was not this small and inconsequential society that emerged in a little corner of what would become Bulgaria and disappeared quickly into basically like history, you know what I mean? Like, these people were actually this crazy advanced civilization that were more ancient than Mesopotamia and Egypt, okay? And they were the first known culture to ever craft golden artifacts. Anyways, Varna is also now home to the largest known prehistoric necropolis in southeastern Europe, okay, which reflects a richness in cultural practices, complex funerary sites, an ancient belief system, and the capacity to produce exquisite and expertly crafted goods. It has come to be known as the cradle of civilization in Europe. So, anyways, there's a whole mess of shit on the Varna culture themselves. This was just specifically on the Varna gold, which is still really a mystery because nobody really knows how this one dude got it. Nobody knows who this guy actually is. But anyways, this was literally the Jeff Bezos of the 5th millennium. So that's it, man. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Okay, so next up is, where did the Sumerians come from? So the Sumerians were the people of southern Mesopotamia whose civilization flourished between 4100 and 1750 BC. Their name comes from the region, which is frequently and incorrectly referred to as a country. Sumer was never cohesively an actual political entity. It was more just a bunch of city-states that all had their own kings, but they were all kind of like interconnected. Anyways, Sumer was the southern counterpart to the northern region of Akkad, whose people actually gave Sumer its name, which they considered to be the land of the civilized kings. And the Sumerians themselves actually referred to their region just as the land, or the land of the black-headed people. And the Sumerians themselves were responsible for many of the most important innovations, inventions, and concepts taken for granted nowadays. Basically, these people invented time, if that makes sense. It kind of doesn't when I say it out loud, but basically they came up with the concept of creating a 12-hour day, a 60-minute hour, and a 60-second minute. They like keep track of time. They were the ones that actually invented the whole concept of keeping track of time, so you can thank them for that.
Thank you so bloody much!
Other inventions or innovations, they had the first school, the earliest version of the tale of the Great Flood, and other biblical narratives, the oldest heroic epic. They had governmental bureaucracies, monumental architecture, and irrigation techniques. So these people were doing it all way back then, like about 7,000 years ago or whatever that is now. So these people were doing it all. Anyways, after the rise of the Amorites in Mesopotamia and the invasion of the Elamites, Sumer basically just ceased to exist. It was completely like gone and destroyed. It was only known through references in the works of ancient writers, including the scribes who actually wrote the biblical book of Genesis. Sumer remained unknown until the mid-19th century, when excavations in Mesopotamia unearthed their civilization and brought many of their contributions to light. The Sumerians also invented the concept of a city, and they actually hold the claimant of the oldest city in the world. The Sumerians considered Eridu as their oldest city, whereas today, like modern archaeology says that Uruk was the first city ever, like just carbon dated and age and all that, whatever science stuff. So just to say it. Anyways, like I said, the Sumerians themselves believed the first city in the world was Eridu, which presided over their god of wisdom and water, which is Enki. Enki supposedly raised it from the watery marshes and established the concept of kingship and order in the land. The establishment of Eridu by Enki was seen as a kind of golden age, comparable to the biblical Garden of Eden as the home of the gods and the birthplace of rules of governing civilizations, and which is kind of funny because it was basically known as the Meh. So anyways, that's basically all I got. Their civilization is so deep and stuff, you can make a fucking whole series on them, for real. So I'm gonna move on right here, but if you're interested, I would definitely tell you to look into them, because they came up with some crazy shit. I mean, bro, if you're coming up with the concept of time, then yo, you're on some different shit, you know what I mean? I would have never. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Okay, up next is the Carnac Stones. So the Carnac Stones are an exceptionally dense collection of megalithic sites near the south coast of Brittany in northwestern France, consisting of these stone alignments, which are like these rows, and these tombs and burial mounds of just different like rocks and stones, and these single menhirs, which are basically like these single standalone stones. Now, more than 3,000 prehistoric standing stones were like found in this local granite and erected from the pre-Celtic people of Brittany, and form the largest collection of the world. All right, most of the stones are within the Breton municipality of Carnac, but some to the east of the neighborhood La Trinité-sur-Mer. The stones were erected at some stage during the Neolithic period, probably around 3300 BC, but some may date back to as early as 4500 BC. Although the stones date from 4500 to 3300 BC, modern myths associate them with 1st century Roman and later Christian occupations. A Christian myth associated with the stones held that they were pagan soldiers in pursuit of Pope Cornelius when he turned them to stone. Brittany has its own local versions of the Arthurian cycle. Local tradition similarly claims that the reason that they stand in such perfectly straight lines is that they are Roman legions turned to stone by Merlin. Everybody's thinking that these things are just people turned to stone. Maybe they are, hey, who knows? Anyways, in recent centuries, many of the sites have been neglected, with reports of domes being used as sheep shelters, chicken sheds, and even ovens. So people don't even give a fuck about these things anymore. Even more commonly, stones have been removed just to make way for roads, or even just as building materials. And the continuing management of the sites remains just a controversial topic, because basically, as you just heard, nobody cares. I mean, they're taking these things out to just use them as building materials, and they're moving them so they can build a road. They don't care about these things anymore. But Pretty dope. I mean, they're just super old rocks that everybody assumes is somebody that turned to stone. So, whatever. We moving on to the next thing though. Okay, up next is Kofun. So, Kofun are these megalithic tombs or tumuli in Northeast Asia. Kofun were mainly constructed in the Japanese archipelago between the middle of the 3rd century and the early 7th century. And the term is the origin of the name of the Kofun period, which indicates in the middle of the 3rd century to early middle 6th century. Many Kofun have distinctive keyhole-shaped mounds. The Kofun tumuli have assumed various shapes throughout history. The most common type of Kofun is known as a Zenpo Koen Fun, is shaped like a keyhole, having one square end and then one circular end. There are also these circular type which are called Empun, and basically these Kofun burial mounds and their remains have been found all over Japan, including remote islands such as Nishoshima, and a total of 161,560 Kofun tomb sites have been found since 2001, basically as of 2001. So there's tons of these things. Most of them have been like found in the Hyogo prefecture with 16,577, and the next one is the Chiba prefecture with 13,112. So that's not that bad. That's a lot, bro. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Okay, so up next is Rupkund. So Rupkund is locally known as Mystery Lake or Skeleton Lake. Basically, this thing is a high altitude glacier lake in the Uttarakhand state of India, and it lies in the Trishmu Massif located in the Himalayas. The area around the lake is uninhabited and is roughly at an altitude of 5,020 meters or 16,470 feet, somewhere around there. Surrounded by rock-strewn glaciers and snow-clad mountains, Rupkund is a popular trekking destination. The size of the lake varies substantially, but is seldom more than 40 meters in diameter, which is about like 1,000 to 1,500 square meters. My bad. And it's always frozen in the winter. It has a depth of about 3 meters, so what's that, like 9 feet? Rupkund is widely known for the hundreds of ancient human skeletons found at the edge of the lake. The human skeletal remains are visible at its bottom when the snow melts. So basically, they're all at the bottom of this lake. So you go there when it's not winter time and all that snow is melted, you can just see tons and hundreds of skeleton remains, basically some horror movie shit, if we're gonna be honest. Anyways, initial investigations led some to believe they were the remains of a semi-legendary event when a single group was killed in a sudden and violent hailstorm in the 9th century. But scientific research has subsequently shown that the remains belong to 3 distinct groups who died in 2 independent events. Skeletons were rediscovered in 1942 by a forest ranger of the Nanda Devi National Park named Hari Kishan Madhwa. At first, British authorities feared that the skeletons represented casualties of a hidden Japanese invasion force, but it was found that the skeletons were far too old to be Japanese soldiers. The skeletons are visible in the clear water of the Shadow Lake during 1 month when the ice melts. Along with the skeletons, wooden artifacts, iron spearheads, leather slippers, and rings were also found in the lake. Basically, when a team from National Geographic retrieved about 30 skeletons in 2003, so flesh was still attached to some of them. Okay, so basically these things have been down there for who knows how long, and they still have flesh on, probably because it's well preserved because of the cold and it only unfreezes for the month. Yeah, basically they don't really know anything about the events that happened, but they just determined that it was 3 separate groups of people that all died in 2 separate events. So it wasn't just one giant hailstorm that just wiped out all these people. But anyways, moving on to the next thing. Okay, so up next is the Sivatherium of Kish. So a Sivatherium is an extinct genus of primordial giraffids that once roamed the Indian subcontinent and all throughout Africa. It was a robust, powerful animal and one of the largest ruminants of all time. However, scholars agree that this thing must have been extinct for a very long time. The species came to be around 7 million years ago in the late Miocene and was gone by the late Pleistocene, roughly 1 million years ago. Some of the earliest indications of this were found on ancient rock paintings in the Sahara and central West India. These crude paintings show an animal much akin to a Sivatherium, suggesting that the animal actually went extinct as recently as 8,000 years ago. Way different than the 7 million years ago where these people think that they first kind of started to show up. Anyways, The main surprise came during an archaeological excavation of the ancient Kish, a Sumerian city-state situated in the ancient cradle of the civilization, Mesopotamia. A chance discovery offered tantalizing evidence that the Sivatherium possibly survived to a more recent times, particularly to the dawn of the Mesopotamian civilization and the first inventions of the wheel and the writing systems. The object in question was discovered during a joint archaeological expedition between the Field Museum and the Oxford University in the mid-1920s. An elaborate copper rain ring created to fit onto the tongue of a chariot. This item was discovered in a deeper level and was dated roughly to around like 3500 BC, and it lays along the remnants of a chariot and skeletal remains of a horse. So basically it was like this big kind of giraffe-id horse, like a giant fucking horse thing that they would put on these chariots and shit. So it's pretty sick. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Almost done. Okay, so next up, what's inside Qin Shi Huang's tomb? So, known today as the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang Di left a legacy that would make him a towering figure in Chinese history. By the time he died in 210 BC, he had united warring kingdoms into one country, put an end to feudalism, and built the Great Wall that endures today, basically, as we all know it, the Great Wall of China. So, this dude, you can thank this guy for that. Anyways, but his most stunning project came to light in 1974 when farmers uncovered strange figures while digging a well near the old Chinese capital of Xiangyang. Excavations have since revealed sections of a grand funerary complex. 3 huge pits harbor several thousand warriors, presumably meant to protect the emperor for eternity. These statues were unlike anything uncovered basically ever before in China. Alright, this was crazy when they first found them. Scientists have gathered a variety of clues. Terracotta acrobats and bronze figures of ducks, swans, and cranes uncovered at the Royal Tomb Complex may show evidence of Greek influence, and European DNA has been recovered from some of the skeletons at the site in the northwestern China. So that just basically shows that they were basically getting people to travel here to either help build this or to, help this guy out in some way. Putting these together, experts have worked out a theory. Inspiration for the terracotta army may have come from foreign artists, traveling from Hellenized areas of Western Asia and arriving in China 1500 years before Marco Polo. They could have trained the local craftsmen who furnished the emperor's tomb with statuary. Basically, like I said, so they hired these guys to come in, at least train these guys, people to do whatever they were going to do. Scientists using remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, and core sampling have also revealed the Emperor's Tomb complex to be much larger than once believed, almost 38 square miles, or almost 98 square kilometers. At its heart stands a tall earthen mound that covers the ruler's tomb, which remains sealed. Basically, it's still closed up to this day. Many other people were also buried at the site. Archaeologists have discovered mass graves that appear to hold the remains of craftsmen, laborers, including convicted criminals in chains who died during the decades. Basically, it took 3 decades to actually build this huge mausoleum, and basically there's just been a bunch of other mass graves that have been kind of found around this area of this guy's burial site. So okay, so last up on the 4th tier of this whole iceberg, what was the Set animal? So in ancient Egyptian art, the Set animal, or Shah, is the totemic animal of the god Set. Because Set was identified with the Greek monster Typhon, the animal is commonly known as the Typhonian animal or the Typhonic beast. Unlike other totemic animals, the Set animal is not easily identifiable in the modern animal world. Today there's a general agreement among Egyptologists that the Set animal was never actually a real creature and was more just imaginary in all of this Egyptian stuff. It was just a fake, a figment of their imagination, I guess, or a fairy tale, a local legend. Anyways, in recent years there have been many attempts by zoologists to find the Set animal in nature. Whether or not the animal existed is actually currently unknown, so nobody really knows if this thing ever was a real or was just imaginary, whatever. Yet either way, it had a ton of significance to the Egyptians. The Set animal is one of the most frequently demonstrated animal determinatives. The Shah is usually depicted as a slender canine kind of thing, resembling a greyhound or a jackal, with 3 distinguishing features. It has a stiff tail. Usually it's forked at the end, basically, so it'll have these kind of 2 things at the end, which stands straight up or at an angle. Whether the animal is sitting or standing or walking, its ears are also straight up, and they're usually depicted as squarish or a little triangular, narrowest towards the base and widest towards the squarish tops. And then it has this long nose, often with a slight downward curve. It is normally depicted as black, but many also have been found where it's like depicted as like a reddish kind of color. The Set animal is usually depicted at rest, either lying down or seated. The shape of the head often resembles a giraffe, causing confusion between the two signs. General body shape is that of a canine kind of thing, like I said, like a dog, jackal kind of thing. The god Set was usually depicted as a man with the head resembling that of the Shah, so it had like the same kind of giraffe almost head with the same ears and nose and all that, which is why Shah is referred to by Egyptologists as the Set animal or the Typhonic beast. So that's the reason why Set is kind of like brought into all these other things. Anyways, although he was also depicted in the form of an ongoer or as a black pig, other animals sacred to Set included the antelope, the hippopotamus, wild boars, crocodiles, and the scorpion, all of which represented strength, power, protection, and wilderness. The Shah was also used as a determinative in the names of Set and the goddess Nut, who may be identified with Nephilis, the wife of Set. And that's basically all we got. So nobody even knows what the actual Set animal is nowadays, or if it was even real, or if it's imaginary. So who knows? But okay, so first up is the Polynesian sweet potatoes. Now, the unassuming sweet potato has been at the center of a decades-long debate about when ancient people in the Americas and Polynesia had first made contact. A study finds that the vegetable, which is native to South America, ended up beating people to the South Pacific Islands by at least 100,000 years. And when Captain James Cook arrived in Polynesia in the early 8th century, the vegetable basically had already been thriving in this area. And the explanation is that Polynesian voyagers that had set sail to South America ended up grabbing a bunch of these sweet potatoes and bringing them back on their return trip and kind of just spreading them around, which makes sense, honestly. And basically, archaeological and genetic data seems to support this whole fact, although some scientists ended up questioning like the evidence over the years. Now, the sweet potatoes seem to be a solid piece of evidence in support of pre-Columbian contact between Polynesians and South Americans until now. The latest study suggests that it's possible that sweet potato seeds crossed the Pacific Ocean without any help from humans at all. Previous research shows that the seeds will sprout even after exposure to salt water. And basically, birds routinely cross the Pacific Ocean and could have spread these seeds. And that's basically the entire idea of this second debate, is that humans might have not even had anything to do with it, and that these birds just ended up migrating and spreading the seeds along their whole journey, which also makes a lot of sense. So Pablo Munoz Rodriguez, who was this botanist at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom, basically him and his colleagues sequenced a bunch of genomes of sweet potatoes and a bunch of close relatives to the sweet potato, and they found one, Ipomia trifida, which is the modern crop's closest living wild relative. And basically among the 200, almost 200, it was 199 exactly specimens that they used for the study, the actual sweet potato plant that they found this from was one collected in 1769 by botanists Joseph Banks and Daniel Solander, who were both members of this Captain James Cook's expedition to Polynesia. And basically they basically figured out that when they split the lineages, that they indicated that the sweet potato was probably in Polynesia tens of thousands of years before people were, probably closer to that 100,000 years before people actually even landed there. And yeah, probably was spread throughout birds.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Up next is the lost city of Dvarka. So Dvarka, also known as Dvarti or the Gated City, is a sacred historical city in the sacred literature of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. And the name Dvarka is said to have been given to the place by Krishna, a major deity in Hinduism. And Dvarka is one of the Saptapuri, or 7 sacred cities of Hinduism. Anyways, there's not much information on this, but they basically have a description from Krishna's point of view, is how I would put it. The city was filled with the sounds of birds and bees flying about the parks and pleasure gardens, while its lakes, crowded with blooming Indavara, Amboja, Kalara, Kamuda, and Utpala lotuses, resounded with the calls of swans and cranes. Dvarka boasted 900,000 royal palaces, all constructed with crystal and silver and splendidly decorated with huge emeralds. Inside these palaces, the furnishings were bedecked with gold and jewels, alright? Traffic moved along a well laid out system of boulevards, roads, intersections, and marketplaces. Many assembly houses and temples of demigods graced the charming city. The roads, courtyards, commercial streets, and residential patios were all sprinkled with water and shaded from the sun's heat by banners waving from flagpoles. And the city of Dvarka was a beautiful private quarter worshipped by planetary rulers. This district, where the demigod Vishvakarma had shown all his divine skill, was the residential area of Lord Hari Krishna, and thus it was gorgeously decorated by the 16,000 palaces of Lord Krishna's queens. Nadara Muni entered one of these immense palaces. Supporting the palace were coral pillars decoratively inlaid with Veduri gems. Sapphires bedecked the walls, and floors glowed with perpetual brilliance. In attendance were many well-dressed maidservants bearing lockets on their necks, and also armor-clad guards with turbans, fine uniforms, and jeweled earrings. And basically that was Krishna's description it was actually in one of the 18 books, ancient historical texts of Hinduism. During 1983 to 1990, the Archaeology Unit of India's National Institute of Oceanography, or NIO, carried out underwater excavations at Dwarka and Bet Dwarka. According to the S.R. Rao, the available archaeological evidence from onshore and offshore excavations confirms the existence of a city-state with the couple of satellite towers in 1500 BC. He considered it reasonable to conclude that this submerged city is the Dvarka that is actually described in the Mahabharata. I hope I said that right. My bad. I got Google Translate. I'm trying for you. But moving on to the next thing. In the lower Pecos Canyonlands of southwest Texas, a mile upstream from where the Pecos River flows into the Rio Grande, the White Shaman rock shelter is carved into a facelift at the end of a limestone canyon. Here, in a small alcove, a 26-mile-long collection of pictographs stretches across a smooth wall that faces west. The pigments have faded over time, but a dense profusion of surreal figures, some highly abstract, others seemingly human or animal-like, are still visible. The setting sun can intensify the figures' yellow and red colors, while a full moon illuminates white images, including the elongated headless human figure that the site gets its name from, which is the White Shaman mural, obviously. Anyways, similar rock art figures, some up to 20 feet high, decorate more than 200 rock shelters within a 90-mile radius around the confluence of the Pecos and the Rio Grande, which basically just means in this 90-mile radius, there is over 200 of these rock shelters, all with different pictographs, all highly detailed. You know what I mean? Probably not as intense as the White Shaman mural, which is why this one is so famous, but they are spread all throughout that whole entire area. Hunter-gatherers who lived in the area from about 2500 BC to about 500 AD created these paintings, which belong to a tradition known today as the Pecos River style. These fantastical pictographs have long defied easy interpretation, and many archaeologists have resisted speculating about their meaning at all. Some believe they often bizarre images were made by shamans to recreate hallucinogenic visions they experienced while under the influence of stimulants. In recent years, Texas State University archaeologist Carolyn Boyd, a former professional artist, has proposed that they represent something much more complex. She has put forth the theory that the pictographs at White Shaman and perhaps other Pecos River style paintings record the beliefs of ancient peoples whose descendants still live in Mexico today. What's more, Boyd is convinced that using scientific and ethnographic methods, we can begin to understand these narratives. These are painted texts, says Boyd. I think we can read them just as the people who created them must have read them. So basically, she's thinking that these are to be interpreted, that it's more of like a language, almost like hieroglyphics, and they are actually saying something, they contain a message, and we just obviously don't understand it because now we speak in words, don't speak in pictures. Moving on to the next one, that was that. I think that one's super interesting. So okay, so up next was supposed to be the tunnels at Baiae, but I just did another video on them, to be honest. I'll give a quick breakdown. Basically, this is either, the tunnels at Baiae are either an ancient site that could be supposedly the river Styx or Hades, whatever you want, like the entrance to the underworld kind of thing, or in my mind, it is kind of just like a ginormous finesse. Now, to understand why, you're gonna have to watch the video, and you know what I mean, hopefully you understand that. But we're moving on to the next thing. Like I said, I think it's a huge finesse. Trust me, watch that. I'm gonna link that one down below too. But moving on to the next thing. Up next is Herto Man. So Herto Man refers to the about 160,000 to 154,000 year old human remains discovered in 1997 from the upper Herto member of basically this mountain range in Ethiopia. This discovery of Hermes Man was especially significant at the time as it fell within a long gap in the fossil record between 300 and 100,000 years ago, and its description in 2003, it represented the oldest dated human sapiens remains at all, basically. So this is the furthest back that we had found at 2003. Does that make sense? Around 2003, this is the oldest back we had figured out that humans went, which was about 160,000 to 154,000 years old. In the original description of the paper, these 12, at minimum, individuals were described as falling just outside the umbrella of anatomically modern human. Thus, Hermes Man was classified into a new subspecies as Homo idaltu. Basically, it's in between. It supposedly represents a transitional morph between the more archaic Homo rhodocenus and Homo sapien, which is what we are now. So it basically linked those two, so it wasn't such a big gap in between them. And subsequent researchers have rejected this classification. The validity of such subspecies is difficult to justify because of the vague descriptions of species and subspecies. And when discussing a chronospecies as the exact end morphology and start morphology of the ancestor and descendant species are inherently unresolvable. Basically, it's a little too complicated to just break humans down into these subspecies, because then it just gets so confusing. I mean, it makes sense. Like, you don't want to start breaking them down in between different, like, generations, I guess. Hermes Man produced many stone tools which can fit into the vaguely defined transitional Automaton, the longest lasting cultural tradition, with both culturalistically Automaton, which is made by archaic humans, and Middle Stone Age, which is made by modern humans tools. So basically they used both. So, which is kind of weird. Basically, it literally is just in between us and the archaic humans, basically. Or the three most complete skulls, one which is a 6 to 7 year old child, had man-made cut marks and other alterations, which could be evidence of mortuary practices, which just means that they had obviously like these rituals and stuff like we sort of do when people die, and we have like these funeral kind of things. Anyways, and the first one was discovered in 1997 from the upper Hero member of the Bori Formation in the middle Awash site of Afar Triangle, Ethiopia. And the materials that they found a bunch of stuff in this discovery. Alright, I'm going to just go through what they actually found. A nearly complete skull missing the left skull cap. They found skull fragments, a partial bone fragment, another partial bone fragment, a nearly complete skull of a 6 or 7 year old, and a right upper molar. Further excavation has yielded a total of 12 individuals. And basically this region of the world is famous for yielding a series of ancient human and hominin species stretching as far back as 6 million years. That's crazy. In 2003, using argon and argon dating, the upper Herto member was dated to 160 to 154,000 years ago, and the Herto man, thus a major fossil find at the time. There, basically, it did solidify that it was the gap between the 300 and 100,000 years ago gap between humans. Does that make sense? I feel like I didn't make a lot of sense when reading that. Hopefully I did. But yeah, there's the Herto man. Basically, up next are the hanging coffins in China. So hanging coffins in China are known in Mandarin as zhuangguan, and they are an ancient funeral custom of some ethnic minorities. The most famous hanging coffins are those which made by the Bo people, who are now extinct, and they basically came from Sichuan and Yunnan. And basically, coffins of various shapes were mostly carved from one whole piece of wood. Hanging coffins either lie on beams projecting outward from vertical faces such as mountains, are placed in caves in the face of cliffs, or sit on natural rock projections from mountain faces. The Bo people were one of the non-Han people native to the southern China prior to the Qin-Han conquest southward. The sparse descriptions of them in Chinese record describe them as being a prosperous farming culture who were also accomplished horsemen. They became victims of genocide by the Ming Dynasty in 1573 AD and are effectively extinct. Basically, they got taken out the map. Their language, rituals, and behaviors are unknown to archaeologists. Like, pretty crazy shit. They're literally lost to just time, you know what I mean? Like, they're lost to history. Unless somebody makes the crazy archaeological find, basically, there's almost nothing known about these people besides the hanging coffins. Is one of like the only things that is actually really known about the Bo people. There is a possibility, however, that the Ku people of Quiberi of southern Yunnan are surviving descendants of some of the Bo. Some of the Ku people are also practicing hanging coffins. People with the surname He in Yunnan are believed to be locally descendants of the Bo. So basically, these He people in Yunnan are supposedly descendants, far off descendants of the Bo people. And basically, they still don't really keep too many of the traditions besides the hanging coffins, which is recognized from the Bo people. That's where their most famous ones are from. The reasons for the hanging coffins of the Bo people are unknown because no Bo people are left. Literally, they just don't know about them. You know what I mean? They don't know why they did this. But it may simply be to prevent the dead from being disturbed. This is implied by Marco Polo's brief observation of the Bo rituals, saying that when deceased, they had their bodies put in a box and taken to the mountain to be put in caves or hung out where others could not reach. Aside from the hanging coffins of the Bo, there are also several other hanging coffin sites found throughout China from differing time periods. They are also similarly mysterious, with the people responsible for them now either extinct or syncretized, which just means that they were basically completely brought into Chinese culture to the point where their rituals, their beliefs, their language, all of their stuff that made them their own type of people basically just got wiped out, and now they are basically, they're just Chinese, you know what I mean? They just got completely brought into Chinese culture. And yeah, that was the hanging coffin. So we're moving on. Okay, so finishing up this first half of the tier is the land of Punt. So the land of Punt is described in ancient Egyptian texts as the land of the gods, in a region rich in resources. Punt was almost certainly located in modern day region of northwest Somalia based on the evidence of the ancient Egyptian inscriptions. And basically, according to this historian Ahmed Abdi, the ancient city of Apon in Somalia is identical to the city of Poen, which is referenced as a part of Punt in ancient inscriptions. So basically, Punt equals Apon. You can think of it, they're the exact same, pretty much, according to this guy. Basically is what I would say, you know what I mean? This guy is saying Apon is almost certainly a part of Punt, basically, is how I would say that. Anyways, let me get back to this. It is well established that Apon, or Punt, traded with Egypt over many centuries, and basically the country is best known for when Queen Hatshepsut basically did a famous expedition in 1493, which was during the 18th century of Egypt. And basically, this exchange between Egypt and Punt brought back living trees to Egypt, and it also marked the first known successful attempt at transporting foreign fauna to another country. This voyage to Punt is only the most famous. However, and evidence suggests that the Egyptians were trading with the land of Punt as early as the reign of the pharaoh Khufu in the 4th dynasty of Egypt, which is around 2600 to 2500 BC. And basically, Queen Hatshepsut did her expedition in 1493 BC, so almost a whole 1,000 years later. Punt came to hold a deep fascination for the Egyptian people as the land of plenty, and was known as Te Netcher, the land of the gods from which all good things came to Egypt. Punt was also associated with Egyptian ancestry in that it came to be seen as their ancestral homeland, and further the land where the gods emerged from and consorted with each other. So basically, Egyptians were all about Punt. They thought they were coming from Punt. They thought the gods came from Punt. They were obsessed with Punt. Anyways, exactly why Punt was elevated from reality into mythology is unknown, but after the reign of Ramses III, the land receded further and further, and in the minds of the Egyptians, until it was gone, and it was basically only a legend and folklore. So basically, people don't know. Probably just so much time had passed in between, and the stories just got passed down and got probably crazier and crazier to the point where people just stopped believing this, and it was just all, you know what I mean, legends, local legends, folklore, all that stuff. But okay, so anyway, first up on the tier is the Pyramids of Argolis. So the Pyramids of Argolis actually refer to several ancient structures located in the plains of Argold, Greece. The best known of these is called the Pyramid of Hellington. In addition to at least 2 pyramids which no longer exist, there are 2 surviving pyramid-like structures that are still available to kind of study and, you know what I mean, excavate and stuff like that. One, like I said, is at Hellington, and the other one is located at Ligerio, which is a village near the ancient theater of Epidaurus. And basically, although these structures are of great interest, written sources are super scarce, and there's almost no mention of them in any ancient sources. The only one I could really find was Pausanias, who was an ancient Greek traveler and geographer from the 2nd century AD, he mentions 2 buildings resembling pyramids in one of his written works. And that's about it, to be honest. There's really not a lot of information on it. I'm assuming that they're still studying up on these, but yeah, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, up next is the Ogdoads. So the Ogdoad was a system of 8 deities, 4 gods and their consorts. The number 4 was considered to represent completeness, so it's always 4 with 4. Each pair represented the male and female aspects of the 4 creative power and sources. Nun and Nanuet represented the primeval waters. He and Hauhet represented eternity. Kuk and Kuket represented darkness, and Amun and Amunet represented air, or that which is hidden. However, the gods differ from one source to another. The gods were all depicted with frogs' heads, while the goddesses had heads of serpents. Only Amun went on to be considered as more than a primeval force. These 8 elements interact and cause an explosion, possibly the Big Bang, not sure, but that's basically the whole idea. And the burst of energy which released caused a primeval mound located at Hierapolis, but originally known as the Isle of Flame, to rise from the water. It was thought that the gods and goddesses of the Ogdoad then ruled the earth during the Golden Age. When they died, they took up residence in the Dua, or the underworld basically, and they ensured that the Nile continued to flow. So basically, the Ogdoad is just a representation of the Big Bang, is what I got from reading all this, and basically just like starting everything on Earth, you know what I mean? Like it says right here. That's pretty dope though, to be honest. But the names, cause that took me a while. Up next are ley lines. So in 1921, amateur archaeologist Alfred Watkins made a discovery. He noticed that ancient sites at different points all over the globe all fell into some sort of an alignment. Be them sites man-made or natural, they all fell into a pattern, usually a straight line. He coined these lines lays, and then later changed it to ley lines, which makes way more sense in my mind. And in doing so, he opened up a world of supernatural and spiritual beliefs. To those who do believe in ley lines, the concept is quite simple. Ley lines are lines that crisscross all over the globe like longitude and latitude signs. They are dotted with monuments and natural landforms and carry along with them rivers of supernatural energy. Along these lines, at places that they intersect, there are pockets of concentrated energy that can be harnessed by certain individuals. Watkins backed up the existence of his ley lines by pointing out many monuments around the globe that can seemingly be connected by a straight line. For example, stretching from the southern tip of Ireland all the way to Israel, there is a straight line that connects several different landforms that all bear the name Michael or some form of it. Though ley lines are geographically accurate on occasion, the existence of these ley lines have been contested since he basically made this observation. One researcher, Paul Devereaux, claimed that the concept was completely bogus and that there was no way this could exist, and that a reference to it in an occult book was the only reason that people actually even believed in this stuff. Jeff Ballinger, who is the author of Paranormal Encounters, a look at the evidence which discusses the supernatural significance of ley lines, agreed. I think he even has the supernatural guy that studies the ley lines agreeing with him, saying that this idea is bogus. He pointed out the fact that the term could be used to describe a line in any length or location, that basically just detracts from its validity, and claimed that it was not specific enough to use, which tons of people agreed, because I mean, if you just put a line from anywhere to anywhere on the map, you're probably lining up a bunch of stuff, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, I mean, the world's happened, so who knows? But we're moving on to the next one. Who were the Guanches? So the Guanches were the first known inhabitants of the Canary Islands. They were the indigenous people when the Spanish conquered the island in the 15th century. The Guanches were primitive people. Some historians actually believe that they were the original inhabitants of Atlantis. I highly doubt it, but you know, just in case. They were very tall. The men were normally from 5 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 2 inches in height. I don't know where they get an idea of tall from that, but that's crazy. I'm like 5'9". I've never been called tall in my life. So Guanches were extraordinarily strong and very nimble, which was attributed to their open cave and outdoor life. Descriptions of the Guanches describe them as having a natural strength in body and soul, being courageous, intelligent, dignified, friendly, passionate, and humble, traits that enable them to face dangers, survive calamities, and befriend their enemies. The Guanches loved to sing and dance, gamble, and hold sporting contests. They also gave sincere hospitality and had deep respect for their elders and a profound love for their family. John de Betancourt was a French explorer who in 1402 led an expedition to the Canary Islands. He remarked that they had not seen a more beautiful race in the world. He also commented that they would have had fine minds too if anyone had taken the trouble to actually educate them. Food was scarce and they had to be frugal. Typically their diet consisted of gofio, wild fruit and fish, and on occasion, on very super special occasions, they would actually roast meat. The Guanches caught fish by dividing the water with lighted torches, and the fish were frightened into reed nets. They had no knowledge of metal. They were primitive because of their isolated position, and this is the reason why the Guanches never progressed beyond methods of the Stone Age. The Guanches had been linked to the Egyptians because of their habit to mummify the dead. Although the Guanches as a race are no longer in existence, it seems many of their traits have been passed down through generations of the Canarians. They too have a love of music and dancing. They are very proud and protective of their families and always offer hospitality. And basically the only living, or the last thing that is relevant to the Guanches still around today is a whistling language still practiced in La Gomera, which is said to have derived from the original Guanches. So that's about it, but we're moving on to the next one. Up next are the Sajama lines. The Sajama lines is an ancient network of pre-Hispanic linear paths located in the Altiplano and highlands of western Bolivia near the Nevado Sajama volcano. The web of lines covers an area of almost 22,525 square kilometers, almost 15 times larger than the Nazca lines, situated over 1,000 kilometers away, and ran a combined length of 16,000 kilometers. Now, very little is actually known about who constructed the lines, and with some sources suggesting that they may date as early back as 1000 BC, being constructed over many generations spanning hundreds of years. The lines were created by scraping aside the darker material of the oxidized rock and soil on the Alpino surface to reveal the lighter subsurface layers. Lines vary in length, with some reaching as far as 20 kilometers, passing relatively straight through rugged topography and natural obstacles. It's been theorized that the lines were used by indigenous people to navigate routes on pilgrimages to sacred sites and to connect them with villages dotted throughout the landscape, basically. With the lines being used into early colonial periods to connect Catholic churches, hilltop shrines, and chapels by the Ameri people. Anyways, yeah, basically, it's just a bunch of lines. There's not much known about them besides the fact that they connected churches, shrines, burial towers, all this stuff, and it's all due to these ancient people, the Ameri people, who were the indigenous people in the area. So moving on to the next one. All right, up next is the Iron Pillar of Delhi. Oh my god. In the Qutbi complex of Delhi stands one of the most curious metal objects in the world, the Iron Pillar of Delhi. The pillar is a 23-foot high Kirti Stanba, or a column of fame or victory column. It weighs more than 6 tons and is made of 98% wrought iron. It is believed that the Iron Pillar of Delhi was crafted using a forge welding, and the pillar is ornate and awe-inspiring. But no one knows just how long or mysterious its history is. According to a popular translation of the Brahmi script upon the pillar is made for a king, presumably one of the Gupta period given the era that it was actually created in. Which Gupta king the Iron Pillar was made for is not made clear by the inscription though, so they don't really know exactly who it is. However, it is widely believed that the king in which the inscription refers to is Chandragupta Vikmatrya. It was also made to honor one of the most important Hindu gods, Vishnu. Now, the purpose of the pillar itself is actually one of its many mysteries. Some say that it was originally supposed to be a flagstaff made for the king in the inscription. Others say that it was a sundial in its original home in Madhya Pradesh. And why it is no longer in its original location in Madhya Pradesh is yet another mystery. There is no evidence of who moved the pillar, or how it was moved, or even why it was moved, basically. And it was moved about 1,000 years ago, so hopefully we find out one day. Going to the next thing though. All right, up next is the Paracas Candelabra. So the Paracas Candelabra is a prehistoric geoglyph found in the Paracas Peninsula at Pisco Bay, Peru. It is estimated to date back to around 200 BC, although many believe it is much older. With a large branch-like appearance, the purpose and meaning of the candelabra is still unknown, so they don't know the exact reason. Some of the speculations that people have given out there have been that it could have been either like a godly symbol, some type of, religious thing, whatever, a gigantic sensograph, or simply a navigation tool for sailors, basically like a lighthouse or a thing just to let them know where they're going. but nobody really knows for sure. Now, the Candelabra is estimated to be approximately 600 to 800 feet tall and can be seen from far away as 12 miles out at sea. The geoglyph was created by cutting 2 feet deep into the hardened soil with rocks placed around the figure. While scientists cannot be certain regarding the age of the Candelabra, pottery found in the area was radiocarbon dated to around 200 BC. It is believed that the pottery belonged to the Paraka civilization, but it has never been confirmed who was responsible for actually creating this geoglyph. They don't know if the Parakas made it or if somebody before them made it. Like they say, a lot of people assume that this is a lot older than 200 BC. And basically the shape of the geoglyph itself is sort of hard to describe. Basically, some say it looks like a cactus plant, while others believe it looks more like a 3-branched candlestick, hence the name Candelabra. And it begins with a single stem at the bottom, then it splits into 3 smaller branches, and each of those separate out again. The conquistadors supposedly believed that the geoglyph represents the Holy Trinity and took it as a sign of a good omen and a sign that basically they should proceed and conquer and Christianize the locals. We're just gonna move on from that one to the next one. Up next is the Great Serpent Mound. So the Serpent Mound is the world's largest surviving effigy mound from the prehistoric era. Located in southern Ohio, the 411 meter long Native American structure has been excavated a few times since the late 1800s, but the origins of the Serpent Mound are still a mystery. As the name suggests, Serpent Mound resembles a giant sinuous snake with a curled tail at the west end and a head at the east end, and 7 winding coils in between. In all, the snake stretches a quarter of a mile and ranges from 1.2 to 1.5 meters, or about 3.5 to 4, like almost 5 feet in height, and 6 to 7 meters, or about 25 feet in width. Serpent Mound is located on the edge of the high plateau overlooking the Ohio Bush Creek in Adams County, Ohio, about 73 miles east of the city of Cincinnati. So if you're out there, go check this out, man. Let me know, send me some pictures, you know what I mean? I'm trying to see this. It's on the site of an ancient meteor impact dated to around 300 million years ago. The crater, measuring around 18 to 14 kilometers, or about like 5 to 9 miles in diameter, is known as Serpent Mound Crater. And basically in 2014, another research team carbon dated a number of other charcoal samples, placing the construction of the Serpent Mound in between 381 BC and 44 BC, with a mean date of 321 BC. So that's basically where they're thinking this was created. Somewhere in between that, they're guessing somewhere closer to the 321, just because that's like the median. I mean, that's the middle average. As the new research suggests, once again, that the Adena were the original builders of the Serpent Mound. The research team believes that the 4 ancient people were most likely modified or renovating it, and pointing to the fact that the other nearby mounds also show evidence of repair or modification by other prehistoric groups. So basically, the original people that made it were the Adena people, and then they believe that the 4 ancient people were just basically renovating it, or almost basically rebuilding it, kind of making sure it didn't break down. So at least that was pretty dope. Even over generations and different prehistorical groups, people are taking care of this shit. That's dope. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. I think we got 2 more left on this, so I'm trying to get done with this. Up next is the Screaming Mummy. In 1881, the Deir el-Bahri royal cache was discovered in Luxor, where priests from the 21st and 22nd dynasties hid the corpses of royal members from previous dynasties to protect them from grave robbers. Inside the Deir el-Bahri cache included a mummy that was dubbed the Screaming Mummy. Recent studies with CT scans and DNA carried out by Zahi Hawass and the scientific team of the Egyptian Mummy Project proved that the Screaming Mummy is the corpse of Prince Pentuar, who is the son of King Ramses III, who was forced to commit suicide by hanging as a punishment for his involvement in the killing of his father in what was known as the Harem Plot. The murderous son was further punished by not mummifying his body and wrapping it with sheepskin, which indicates that he was considered unclean and destined to hell in the afterlife, while other mummies were wrapped in white linen and carefully mummified. So basically, they just said, fuck this kid.
Get fucked!
And that's the reason why you're unclean, you're going to hell. We're not even gonna wrap you up in this white linen, we're wrapping you up in some dirty ass sheepskin. Like, you know what I mean? They basically put him in a condom, bro. Like, at the end of the day, they put him in a condom.
Die of gonorrhea and rot in hell.
Anyways, the same royal cache in the Deir el-Bahri contained a mummy of a woman showing signs of terror, pain, and screaming on her face, known as the Screaming Woman Mummy. Her head is tilted to the right side and her legs are bent and wrapped at the ankle, while other mummies are closed-mouthed and placed in a straight position. Writings in the heretic language on linen scrolls about the woman Screaming Mummy refer to it as the royal daughter, the royal sisters Meritmen. However, the mummy was considered unknown and was labeled the Mummy of the Unknown Woman, as there were many princesses with the same name. So basically, they don't know who this lady is, and now she's forever labeled as the Mummy of the Unknown Woman, or the Screaming Woman Mummy. So there you go. Alright, so second to last is the Anasazi. The Anasazi is a name given to the ancestral Puebloans, who were an ancient Native American culture that flourished in the southwestern United States. Scholars believe that the Anasazi culture began around the 12th century BC and continued to grow and flourish until ending suddenly around 1350 AD. It spanned the area of the US most commonly known today as the Four Corners, encompassing basically southeastern Utah, northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and southwestern Colorado. Basically, it's the exact spot where all four corners of those states touch. I'm pretty sure that's what the Four Corners is, where you can stand on the one spot and you're in all four states at once, technically. But that is the area in which these people were actually living at the time. Trade and art also flourished during this period, and domesticated turkeys first appeared. The Anasazi built three major settlements during this period: Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and Taos Pueblo. During the course of the 12th and 13th centuries though, the Anasazi got up and just disappeared from their settlements and cities completely. Absolutely just dipped. Scholars are still unsure of the exact reason of the mass exodus. Possible factors include climate change, drought, environmental changes such as erosion and deforestation, religious changes, warfare with other groups, or just an influx of new people and cultures into the area, which kind of drove these people out. But the Anasazi, why they actually just all disappeared and left these three big settlements is still a mystery, and it's pretty crazy because when you actually see the pictures of the settlements, they're built right into the wall. Pretty crazy stuff, man. But we're moving on to the last thing finally. Alright, and last up for this tier is the Kabiri. Now, the Greek pantheon of gods has many members. Not all were universal gods such as Zeus or Poseidon, instead being tied to a specific place or niche activity, and not all were universally understood. There were cults of secret gods as well. So basically, there were just tons of stuff, and the Kabiri was one of these secret worship cults. This group of strange Chthonic deities were worshipped in a mystery cult and were closely associated with Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods. Centered in the North Aegean islands of Lemos and possibly Semiramis and Thebes, which was east of Greece, much of this cult is not fully understood. It seems to draw on pre-Greek and other non-Greek elements from around the Mediterranean and even further far away. Basically, they just took a bunch of different inspiration from pre-Greek, non-Greek, just different cultures and brought it all in with this cult. That makes sense. However, why these cultures actually contributed to the Kabiri still remains mysterious to this day. Nobody really knows why. At its heart, the Kabiri were a group of gods who were worshipped by the initiated. However, the identities of these gods are not so easy to pin down, and any attempt to reconstruct the mysteries of the cult are limited by its secrecy. So they don't even really know the exact gods. They're going off of a few that they have some descriptions of, but we do, however, know of twin gods known as Daimones, who oversaw the erratic dances of Semerant in honor of the fertility god Demeter, her daughter Persephone, and the divine witch Hecate. The pair were well-known metalworkers, the dwarfish sons of the god Hephaestus, who worked at their father's Lemnian forge. However, the identities of the other gods worshipped there were a secret, and basically offerings were just simply made to the gods. No specific name, their names were never recorded, the identities of the gods were never recorded, and the initiation ceremonies were never recorded either. So basically nobody has ever been able to learn the secrets of the Kabiri, and it's pretty crazy because honestly I think this one sounds super interesting. I wish I could find more information on it. This is basically everything I could find, but that's about it for that one. Okay, so first up is Adam's calendar. Known by African elders as the birthplace of the sun, or Inzalo Ilangwa, and dubbed Africa's Stonehenge, the site was first brought to public attention in 2003 by a South African pilot, Johan Heine. He had been flying over the mountains of South Africa for over 20 years and took interest in the thousands of strange circular stone objects scattered throughout the region and began photographing them. An air crash involving one of his crew brought Johan to discover the mysterious monolithic circle by accident. En route to find one of his pilots who crashed his plane, Johan noticed an arrangement of large stones sticking out of the ground next to the crash site. While rescuing the injured pilot down the side of the cliff, Johan walked over to the monoliths and realized there were lines at the cardinal points: north, south, east, and west, as well as the equinoxes and solstices. There were at least 3 monoliths aligned towards the sunrise, but on the west side of the aligned monoliths there was a strange hole in the ground. After weeks and months of measuring and making observations, Johan suspected that it was a stone calendar. The first calculations of the age of the calendar were made based on the rise of Orion, a constellation known for its 3 bright stars forming the belt of the mythical hunter. The Earth wobbles on its axis, so the stars and constellations change their angle of presentation in the night sky on a cyclical basis. This rotation, called the precession, completes a cycle about every 26,000 years. By determining when the 3 stars of Orion's belt were positioned flat against the horizon, it is possible to estimate the time when the 3 stones in the calendar were in alignment with these stars. According to Tellinger, a calculation done by astronomer Bill Holenbach based on the rise of Orion suggested an age of the site at least 75,000 years. A further calculation done in June 2009 suggests an age of at least 160,000 years, based on the rise of Orion's flat on the horizon, but also on the erosion of the dolerite stones found at the site. Some pieces of the marker stones had been broken off and sat on the ground exposed to natural erosion, which you already know takes a long time. When the pieces were put back together, about 3 centimeters of stone had already been worn away. These calculations helped assess the age of the site by calculating the erosion rate of the dolerite. The latest and most interesting discovery of the stone circles in Adam's calendar is the sound frequencies of the rock formations from like actually below the earth beneath them. With modern technology, Tellinger and scientists have been able to detect and measure sound frequencies with acoustic properties made from the earth inside the circles which conduct electricity. Alright, so sounds weird already, but listen to this. These sound frequencies of the earth under the stones are shaped as flowers of sacred geometry as they surface to the ground. So basically, as the sound waves move closer to the surface, they end up becoming the shape of flowers of sacred geometry. There is still a ton that's not known about Adam's calendar though, like who built it, what their civilization was even like, and how they constructed it with these crazy precise measurements. So hopefully one day we'll figure out more about Adam's calendar, because I think that's super interesting. But we're moving on to the next one. I spent long enough on that. So up next is the Baigong pipes. Local legend speculates that Mount Baigong in the Qinghai province of China is an ancient extraterrestrial laboratory. Aside from the mysterious pyramid that crowns the mountain, 3 triangular entrances at the mountain's base leads the way to hundreds of decrepit metal pipe-like structures of unknown origin. The rusty tubes, ranging from needle-sized to 16 inches in diameter, reach from deep inside the mountain to a saltwater lake 260 feet away. Many of the hollow pipes are uniform in size and seem to be placed purposefully. The ancient objects are embedded deep enough into the mountain wall and floor to basically be way earlier than any modern human handling. The inhospitable environment surrounding the mountain sees only the occasional nomad. Unless these wanderers developed secret metallurgy skills, these pipes were not formed by human hands. The first scientists to examine the subterranean phenomenon concluded that the pipes were composed of 92% common materials, like minerals and metals, and 8% unknown materials, which they basically took to mean that the 8% of unknown materials were actually transported here from outer space as part of an alien public works program, project, whatever, but that was what they were thinking, these original scientists. Now, the ancient alien idea got so much support that they actually ended up building a monument topped off with a corroded satellite dish, and they put it up near the mountain. The most recent researchers to examine the pipes believe that the metallic phenomena is in fact fossilized tree roots. The rusted tubes being the result of tree roots that underwent the process of pedogenesis, which is the process that forms soil, and diagenesis, which transforms soil into rock. And finally, after doing a bunch of further experiments, they actually confirmed that the pipes contain organic plant material and even microscopic tree rings. And the leading theory is that overflow from an extinct lake once carried these roots to basically where they are now, and that's where they stayed. So we're moving on to the next one. Up next is human-made ditches in the Amazon rainforest. In 2014, a study published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences revealed that a series of mysterious lines and geometric shapes carved into the Amazonian landscape were created thousands of years ago, before the rainforest even ever existed. Now, the purpose of these massive earthworks and who created them still is unknown, and scientists are beginning to realize just how much there still is to learn about the prehistoric cultures of the Amazon and life before the arrival of the Europeans. Because apparently we weren't looking into anything like that. I didn't even realize that, but anyways, the unusual earthworks, which include square, straight, and ring-like ditches, were first uncovered in 1999 after a large area of pristine forest was cleared for cattle grazing. Since then, hundreds of earthen foundations have been found in the region. These ditches were sculpted from the clay-rich soils of the Amazon and are typically around 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep, along with 3-foot-high walls. However, the largest ring ditches found so far are an incredible 1,000 feet in diameter. The purpose of the ditches is still a complete mystery though. The fact that many of them are clustered on a 200-meter high plateau suggests that they may have been used for defense. However, others have suggested that they were used for drainage or for channeling water, since most were placed near spring water sources. A team of researchers who published a paper in the journal Antiquity in 2010 argued that the layout of the ditches is highly symbolic, suggestion of a ceremonial or a religious function. And until recently, it was believed that the earthworks dated back to only around 200 AD. However, the latest study has revealed that they are in fact much older. Study author John Francis Carson, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom, explained that the sediment cores had been taken from 2 lakes near the major earthwork sites. Now, the results revealed that the oldest sediments did not even come from a rainforest ecosystem at all. In fact, they actually showed that the landscape before about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago looked more like the savannas of Africa than today's lush rainforest. The earthworks predate the shift from savanna to rainforest, which revealed that the creators of these ditches carved them before the forest moved in around them. So basically, the people that carved these things had never even known that this place became the Amazon rainforest. They were doing this thousands of years before this thing even showed up, which blows my mind, to be honest, because they missed out at the end of the day. If they were chilling in the savannah and you missed out on the whole rainforest, that sucks. I can't even lie, that kind of sucks in my mind, but we're moving on to the next thing. Okay, so up next is the Vrujum El Hiri. This is the largest ancient megalithic monument in the Near East, located about 10 miles east of the Sea of Galilee in the western part of the historical Bashan plain of the Golan Heights, which is basically, it's a contested area that's claimed both by Syria and Israel. So Vrujum El Hiri is believed to function at least partially as an astronomical observatory. Built and used during the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age between 5,500 and 5,000 years ago, Vrujum El Hiri is made out of an estimated 40,000 tons of uncut black volcanic basalt fieldstones, piled and wedged into between 5 and 9 concentric rings, depending on how you count them. Some people see less, some people see more. And they all are reaching 3 to 5 feet in height. More recent and extensive studies were carried on at the site in the 21st century and reported by Michael Freichman and Naomi Porritt. These investigations, which included a landscape survey of sites and features within 5 kilometers of the site, identified a dense Chalcolithic occupation of some 2,000 people in 50 settlements. At the time, there was a crescent-shaped row of houses surrounding the Vrujum El Hiri, but none were within the immediate vicinity of the monument. Now, with optically stimulated luminescent dating, or OSL for short, they used this, and basically this supports the new date, with dates falling between the mid-3rd to early 4th millennial BC. Freichman and Porritt have discovered a small irregularly shaped opening in the wall of the central cairn that on the solstice would have allowed the sun's rays to enter and strike the large flat stone at the entrance of the central chamber. And the team also suggests that the original construction may predate the end of the 5th millennium, or somewhere from 5000 BC to 4001 BC. And that's basically all the information I could find on the Vrujum El Hiri. If you can find anything else, or if you know anything else, I couldn't find literally anything. So if you can find anything, link it below, let me know. Other than that, I'm moving on to the next thing though. Next up is structure under the Sea of Galilee. A giant monumental stone structure discovered beneath the waters of the Sea of Galilee in Israel has archaeologists puzzled as to its purpose and even how long ago it was built. The mysterious structure is cone-shaped, made of unhewn basalt cobbles and boulders, and weighs an estimated 60,000 tons. The researchers say that this makes it heavier than most modern-day warships. The structure was first detected in the summer of 2003 during a sonar survey of the southwest portion of the sea. Divers have since been down to investigate. They say that it's definitely human-made and was probably built on land, only later to be covered by the Sea of Galilee as the water level rose. The shape and composition of this submerged structure does not resemble any natural feature. We therefore conclude that it is man-made and might be termed a cairn. That's exactly what these divers said when they went down and looked into it, researched it. Researcher Yitzhak Paz of the Israeli Antiquities Authority and Ben Gurion University believes it could date back more than 4,000 years. If the 3rd millennium BC date idea proves to be correct, it would put the structure about a mile to the north of a city that researchers called Bet Yura or Kirbet Karak. I messed those names up, I'm sorry. I even tried Google Translate, I still couldn't understand it, how to say it, but anyways. Basically, they're trying to connect it because if they are around the same date, it would make sense that they are close cities, because it would have been also another city that would have traded with them, all that stuff. But since it's underwater and they don't know any of this, there are basically still a bunch of mysteries for it. So I'm moving on to the next thing. If you know any extra information, if you can find anything, please link it down below. Let me know, because I'm still interested in finding all this stuff out. But anyways, I'm moving on to the next one. All right, up next is the Tophet at Carthage. Tophets are at the center of one of the most contentious archaeological debates surrounding the region of northern Africa that was once part of the ancient Carthaginian Empire. The word Tophet comes from a place described in Hebrew scripture where people who were influenced by the ancient Canaanite religion burned and sacrificed children to their gods. It's also another term for hell. The enigmatic ancient cemeteries are believed to have been used for the ritual sacrifice of children and animals. The burial site at Carthage in Tunisia, as well as others in the region, were discovered in the 20th century. It, along with the others, contained funerary urns stuffed with the cremated ashes and bone fragments of young children. Over 20,000 urns buried under the stelae, which are stone slabs with inscriptions, were found at the Tophet in Carthage, which is one of the largest cemeteries from the Phoenician period. These findings and subsequent research, which included referencing accounts in ancient texts, propelled the theory that infants were sacrificed and cremated as part of the ritual to give thanks for favors from deities, mainly the goddess Tanit and the god Baal, which, of course, a dude named Baal or a god named Balls is literally the guy that wants children. Like, come on, dude. Like, that's crazy.
It is not pronounced Baal, it is pronounced Baal. As in, the Baal from the Old Testament.
For many years, the rumors that the ancient Carthaginians had sacrificed their own young was considered to be propaganda spread by the Greeks and Romans, who disliked them and the wider Phoenician civilization. Over the decades, several groups of historians have debated the subject, but they have yet to reach a concrete answer. Most recently, a team led by an Oxford historian ruled that there was strong evidence that the ritual sacrifices did in fact take place. This wasn't even just an isolated incident either. It actually was happening over several different centuries. And today, the tombstones and the ritual altars form part of a historical site outside of the capital city of Tunis, which was granted World Heritage status in 1979. So I'm pretty sure you can actually go and visit this place. But I don't know, that's a pretty depressing place to go visit. I'm not even gonna lie, man. I don't know. Up next is why the Zuzzateni and Tripilia cultures burn their houses down. The Zuzzateni Tripilia culture is believed to have existed for about 2,750 years. During these years, they were fairly static and stable, occupying a vast area of nearly 350,000 square kilometers, with their densely populated settlements. In terms of agriculture, the Zuzzateni Tripilia culture was very advanced for the Neolithic era. They harvested and planted wheat, peas, legumes, and barley, harvested crops, cultivating the soil, and tended livestock was probably the main occupation of a majority of the people during this time and in this culture. The surviving evidence suggests that every household had members in the family who would go to the fields in order to raise crops. However, there were also hunter-gatherers and would hunt animals in the dense forests of the region. In addition to the agricultural work, the Zuzzateni Tripilia culture also created pottery and textiles. According to the archaeological evidence, they possessed excellent skills in pottery making. They worked with the clay in order to create statues, pottery, and other popular figures. They were also proficient in crafting hooks and jewelry pieces from copper. One of the most interesting yet mysterious aspects of the Zuzzateni Tripilia culture is the manner in which they treated their structures and settlements. These were not simply dwellings, but sophisticated multi-story buildings constructed using wood. A number of temples, individual dwellings, and public structures have been discovered, all of which were well constructed and shows evidence of sophisticated planning. These were Europe's first cities, built before the great civilizations of the Bronze Age, Mediterranean, and Middle East, and between 4000 and 3500 BC held up to 50,000 people. However, the Zuzzateni Tripilia saw these as temporary structures, and throughout their long history, their cities were ritualistically burned down to the ground every 60 to 80 years before relocating and rebuilding. There are a number of theories relating to the repeating burning of the settlements. One theory suggests that the homes were burnt accidentally, which to me makes no sense because we already went over the fact that they've been burned every 60 to 80 years. Evidence shows that there's multiple structures being built on top of each other. So how many accidents do they think that this is actually happening? Like, how many times do they think an accident happens until it's like, all right, now they're doing this on purpose? I mean, if it's happening every 60 to 80 years, I would just assume like this is just something that they do, but it makes sense that it was just a ritual, something that they did just as a culture in general, because clearly this was no accident. It wasn't just something that they burned down every 60 to 80 years, like, fuck, we had another accident. You know what I mean? Like, clearly this was on purpose. So do I know the purpose? No, but I mean, I don't know. To me, it's easy to see that because I feel like they're smart enough to figure out all this agriculture stuff. Why wouldn't they figure out a way just to not burn down their houses? You know what I mean? I don't know. But we're moving on to the next thing. Up next is Atlantis of the Sands. It is also referred to as Ubar by the Bedouins, who are the people of the desert, and as Iram in the Quran. So if you hear any of those names, it's all talking about the same place, the Atlantis of the Sands. It is one of the most mysterious and intriguing legendary lost cities, reputed to have once been a magnificent and prosperous trading post. The city may have been founded as early as 3000 BCE and may have perished between 300 and 100 CE. Herodotus, Pliny the Elder, Strabo, and other ancient authors, though not specifically mentioning Ubar, gave brief accounts of cities in southern Arabia that marketed resins from frankincense and myrrh. It was perfectly located in southern Arabia between India and the Mediterranean, directly on the trade route, and merchants used that route to transport fine spices and highly valuable resins and essential oils for sale. The Atlantis of the Sands may have been popular trading and stopping point, and thus wary travelers could water their camels and stock up on goods and commodities. It has never been conclusively discovered, but this grand place may have been inspired by a real-life city that once existed. Bertram Thomas was one such explorer of southern Arabia who had heard great tales about the lost city from his Bedouin guides on various expeditions. In 1930, he set out to locate Ubar. Thomas was told by his guides that it was dangerous to attempt to search for Ubar because it had met its fate as a result of wickedness. Thomas persisted in his explorations anyways, but he died before having a chance to find it. He left behind a book he wrote in 1932 called Arabia Felix. In his book, he described the people of the region and the place called Ubar. Thomas said that he had found traces of the lost city and well-worn tracks that had been used to get there. Thomas's book inspired Nicholas Clapp, and consequently his research led him to a city mentioned in the Quran. That city, called the Iram of Pillars, sounded very familiar to Ubar. In addition, he looked at old maps, primarily one drawn by Ptolemy in 200 AD. Clapp also used satellite images taken by NASA that revealed camel tracks leading to a place called Shizar. Many people now call this Shizar Ubar. They began excavations where the tracks converged on the satellite image, which led to an interesting find. The team discovered a well and nearby a large octagonal fortress with tall towers and high walls. Unfortunately, a large part of the fort had collapsed into a sinkhole, therefore they were unable to excavate a significant area. It is unknown if this fortress may have been an outpost for a larger settlement. It is possible that this amazing place only existed in stories of the Iram in the Quran and in the minds of the Bedouins. However, it seems more likely that folktales are based on a real place that actually did exist in the once prosperous region. And interestingly enough, the story of Iram says that it suffered a terrible sandstorm for 7 days that covered the city. And basically, a lot of people kind of put this together and think that Shizar Ubar is actually the Iram from the Quran and the Atlantis of the Sands, because basically a large sinkhole that buried this city sounds really close to basically this, you know what I mean? Like nobody can obviously conclusively say that it is this unless they excavate that area, but it's pretty close, you know what I mean? I mean, sandstorm covering this place in 7 days, or a giant sinkhole just opening up and eating it. I mean, back then they probably wouldn't even know what a sinkhole was at the end of the day. But anyways, moving on, we got 2 more left for this half and then doing the rest next week. Alright, we made it to my favorite one of this video, the cannabis burial shroud in China.
Why am I not surprised?
Obviously, if y'all know me from the other videos, you clearly know why I like this one, but let's get into it. A team of archaeologists led by Hongjian Zhang with the University of Chinese Academy of Scientists working in the Turpan Basin in the northwest part of China has unearthed the skeleton of a man who died between 2500 and 2800 years ago and was covered with a cannabis shroud when he was buried. Basically, they must have found me in a past life at the end of the day. Like, trust me, once we get into this description, you'll understand, like, this might have been me, cuz like I can't even lie to you. Humans have had a long history of using cannabis for a variety of purposes. As hemp, it's been used to make rope and clothes. Its seed have been consumed to gain nutrition from the oils that they contain, but perhaps most notoriously, the plant has been burned or eaten to obviously get high or feel a feeling of euphoria. In this new find, it appears that the plant may have been used as part of a burial ritual. The skeleton has been identified as once belonging to a Caucasian man, approximately 35 years old at the time of his death. And listen, I'm not close to 35, but I mean, if you could see the skin tone, clearly I'm a Caucasian man at the end of the day. I don't know really what I believe in, but listen, if it was anybody in the past life, this was me, my guy. Now, those that had buried him had placed a willow pillow underneath his head and then had placed a shroud of 13 cannabis plants over his chest, reaching from below his pelvis at one end to the side of his face on the other. So the researchers note that other examples of cannabis use have been found in other nearby graves, but none as shrouds. Mainly they were simply seeds or leaves just tossed in the grave site before burial. Researchers point out that their find is the first to have full cannabis plants and the first time it has ever been seen used as a shroud, like I just said. They believe the inclusion of the whole plant suggests that the plants were grown locally. Also, the ripeness of the heads suggested that they had been harvested and buried in the later part of the summer. And because the heads were covered in glandular trichomes, which contain THC, the active ingredient in such plants, they were believed that they were getting high with these things, basically. You know what I mean? Like, they were definitely smoking. They were letting these things grow all the way. They weren't just using it for the hemp. They were growing these things fully out, and they were using them. You know what I mean? Anyways, we got one more left on this half, and then we're done. Last up for this half is liquid mercury in Titihakan. And don't even get mad at me if I say this wrong, because I got Google Translate right here telling me this is how it's said. Titihakan. So there it is.
Together, this name is Teotihuacan.
Titihakan.
Why, God? Why?
Titihakan, the great city of the Mesoamericans in Mexico, has long fascinated archaeologists and researchers. The largest pre-Columbian city in the Americas for 500 years, maybe 120,000 people lived in this great metropolis, built around the central famous Avenue of the Dead. 3 great pyramids link the avenue: the Pyramid of the Sun, the Moon, and the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. Now, this last of the 3 is currently the most archaeologically interesting, and in 2003, 2 archaeologists from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History found a secret tunnel leading under the massive structure. The hidden tunnel had remained in an undisturbed state for about 1,800 years. It was the first uncovered by archaeologist Sergio Gomez Chavez after a heavy rainstorm. Days after the heavy rain, Sergio arrived at Titihakan and found a 3-foot wide sinkhole at the foot of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Gomez took out a flashlight and shined it inside the tunnel. However, he was not able to see anything except for complete darkness. So he decided to actually descend into the tunnel to find out what was inside. He tied a rope around his waist and he started to be lowered in by his colleagues. Gomez came to a rest in the middle of the tunnel and saw that the passage of the tunnel was blocked by huge stones in both directions. So you can imagine he's right here, and both sides he sees giant stones, and he is actually stuck at this point, or he knows that he can't really go any further. He knew that other archaeologists had discovered a narrow tunnel underneath the Pyramid of the Sun previously. So he made an assumption that what he found was a similar structure underneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. By the beginning of 2004, Gomez had assembled a team of 20 selected workers and archaeologists. Together, the team started to scan the ground beneath the temple, and by 2005, they were successful in completing a digital map. As Gomez had thought, the tunnel ran about 100 meters or 330 feet from the citadel and plaza surrounding the temple to the core of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. As the Mexican archaeologists began to work in the new tunnel, they discovered thousands of artifacts in 3 distinct underground chambers. The artifacts included boxes of rubber balls and carved shells, jaguar remains, and jade statues in much higher quantities than were found anywhere else throughout the city. But what really surprised the archaeologists the most was the presence of a huge quantity of liquid mercury. Now, mercury is a highly toxic substance that is capable of causing significant damage to the human body when exposed for long periods of time. And according to Gomez, the lake of liquid mercury seems to be a representation or a symbol of an underworld lake or river. Now, Gomez also believed that it was a sign that his team was getting closer to discovering the first royal tomb in Titihakan and potentially unearthing the mysteries of the powerful city. Now, Rosemary Joyce, professor of anthropology of the University of California, says that the liquid mercury might have been created by the Mesoamericans with use of the mercury core. In her quote exactly, she says, "They certainly had access to this material, but it was mostly used for coloring the bodies of the royals and decorating jade objects." To compound the mystery, mercury was rare in ancient Mexico. Moreover, the ore was difficult to mine, and the scarcity of it, combined with its reflective properties, made mercury a very valuable substance. The mercury accumulation in Titihakan would have been super valuable, and it is believed that the Lake of Mercury did have some ritual or supernatural significance to the people at that time. No royal tombs have been found in the hidden tunnel to this day, and researchers have not been able to identify the purpose of the structure. So there's still a ton of things that we don't know about this entire structure at all. But okay, so the first one up on this half of this tier was honestly the only entry on the iceberg that I really couldn't find any information for. It was the St. Thomas silver coins in India. I did find a few things, but it wasn't enough information to really do anything with. And then other than that, it was just ways to buy the St. Thomas silver coins. So if anybody can find any information, definitely link it down below and I'll make a separate video or something if I can find enough information. But other than this, we're going right to the next one to start it off. So first up is the Griffin Warrior Tomb. In spring 2015, the University of Cincinnati resumed its program at Pylos, directed by professors Sharon Sherry Stalker and Jack Davis. They focused their efforts on an olive grove northeast of the Nestor Palace site. The team was thrilled when masonry was discovered just below the surface. Portions of a rectangular structure nearly 8 feet long were exposed, which the team realized was a shaft tomb, a burial method practiced early in Mycenaean history. To the team's great surprise, the grave was intact, covered by a broken slab that most likely collapsed due to an earthquake. The chamber still contained human remains and a ton of goods, including weapons, vessels, and jewels. One of the most distinctive goods inside was an ivory plaque adorned with a griffin that gave the occupant the name the Griffin Warrior. They found a ton of different bronze weapons, including a dagger, some very deteriorated armor, a helmet that was made of boar's tusks, and a long sword that was longer than 3 feet with a gold-plated hilt. Now, although the investigation is far from complete, initial analyses have determined that the Griffin Warrior was a man in his early 30s that stood somewhere in between 5 and 6 feet tall. Not very descriptive. The cause of his death is still unknown because of the poor state that his body was found. The burial reveals that, contrary to the descriptions of funerary sites in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Mycenaean funerary practices in that time consisted of burial and not of cremation. The team set about trying to place as precise a date as possible on the grave and its contents. Normally, ceramics found in such burials help archaeologists calculate its age, but this burial contained no ceramic goods at all. And that was all I really could find on the Griffin Warrior tomb. There wasn't too much information out there. If you can find anything else on it, please link it down below. Let me know. I'm interested as always just to learn whatever other people find out other than I do. So other than that, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so this next entry, I swear I thought that this was a troll. I was hoping that this was just a troll entry on here. But when you put this into Google, apparently this is a real thing. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just like out of the loop and I'm just not hip, but the next entry up is, where is Jesus's foreskin?
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Questionable, but apparently a lot of people want to know. So anyways, let's get into it. According to the New Testament, Jesus, who was born a Jew, was ritually circumcised at 8 days old. What happened to his foreskin? That mystery is the subject of PhD candidate James White's doctoral thesis titled Ring of Flesh, the late medieval devotion to the holy foreskin, and David Farley's book, An Irreverent Curiosity, in the search of the church's strangest relic in Italy's oddest town. Now, throughout history, the holy foreskin has reportedly been held in various places. There were likely more than a dozen false foreskins circulating. Basically, tons of places had just random foreskins that were not Jesus's.
Why the fuck would you do that?
One of these alleged foreskin relics arrived in Rome around 799 AD when King Charlemagne presented it as a gift to Pope Leo III. Now, just imagine getting that as a gift. Like, it's your birthday and your boy pulls up on you, you open up this box, and that's what you get. Are you happy? I'm just confused at that point. I got a bunch of questions off the rip. Where'd this come from? How did you get it? Why are you giving this to me? Why did you think I would like this? Like, what happened to gift cards? You feel me? It remained in the papal Sanctum Sanctorum reliquary until the sacking of Rome in 1527. The invasion left half of the population dead, and many sacred relics were stolen or destroyed. The holy foreskin, along with a piece of the Holy Cross, was said to have been discovered about 30 years later in the village of Calcutta, just north of Rome. The church that housed the holy foreskin is called the Chiesa del Ses, the Nome de Gesù, or the Church of the Holy Name, which is a reference to Jesus' circumcision and naming day. Every January 1st, the local priest would lead a procession around the village with the holy relic held high. Now, under pressure to banish the Catholic Church practices that could be seen as culturally backward, the Vatican issued a decree in 1900 threatening excommunication to anyone who wrote about the holy foreskin.
I will not tolerate such behavior. Either shut up and get out.
In 1983, just a few weeks prior to the January 1st Feast of the Holy Circumcision, the local priest went to check on the relic, but it was missing. Some suspected that the local priest had given it back to the Vatican. Others believes that it was stolen by Satanists, of course. The truth is that no one knows where it ended up, and personally, I'm not really worried about this dude's foreskin. If you are, I hope that you end up figuring out the answer to where it is, but hey, it's crazy to me that this many people actually cared about this. Like, I really thought this was a troll. I thought this was one of those just fake entries on this, but goes to show you what you really know. Anyways, we're moving on to the next thing. Up next is Apollonius of Tyana. Born at Tyana in Asia Minor, Apollonius was educated at Taurus and at the temple of Asclepius of Aegea, where at 16 he devoted himself to the doctrine of Pythagoras, whose teachings he followed for all of his life. In his quest for further knowledge, he traveled to eastern countries and, according to legend, performed miracles wherever he went. Apollonius was said to have warned the citizens of Ephesus of an impending plague, but they all ignored his warnings until the pestilence struck. Remembering his prophecy, they sought further advice of the man they thought to be a mighty magician, who revealed that there was a wretched beggar among them, who should be stoned to death. After the deed was done, the people removed the pile of stones under which they thought the beggar laid. However, they only found a black dog, which Apollonius explained was the actual cause of the entire plague. Apollonius is also said to have stopped one of his former students, Menipus of Corinth, from marrying a vampire. Apollonius appeared as a guest at the wedding festivities before the banquet. He then made all the banquet amenities and even some of the guests disappear, proving that they must have been an illusion created by the evil bride. He then made the young woman confess to her true identity, thereby rescuing Menipus from a terrible fate on his wedding night. Another recounting has an Indian magician making 7 rings representing the 7 planets and giving them to Apollonius, who wore a different one each day. The legend has it that this enabled him to maintain his youthfulness well into old age, with his living reportedly to 100 years old. Especially back then, that's crazy. There is also a mystery surrounding Apollonius' death. Some reported that he fell out of favor with Emperor Severus, who put him on trial and had his hair cut off to eradicate his magical powers. Then Apollonius simply vanished from the courtroom, never to be seen again. Although his followers insisted that he died, they nonetheless think that he made it into heaven. Meanwhile, Philostratus related several other versions of Apollonius' death, including that the sage of Tyana vanished in the temple of the goddess Tyana. Apollonius had continued to exert significant influence throughout the centuries. Coins were struck and statues erected commemorating him, and in Tyana a temple was built and dedicated to him. Basically, they're still fucking with him even to this day, so word to him. But we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so up next is Ashura. Ashura, along with Astarte and Anath, was one of the 3 great goddesses of the Canaanite pantheon. In Canaanite religion, her primary role was that of the mother goddess, and in mythological texts from the late Bronze Age, she is mentioned of a city-state of Urugrit. She is called the creatress of the gods. Her consort at Urugrit is the god El, and he's called the creator. El is also referred to as father and the patriarch at Urugrit, whereas Ashura is called mother, and their children form the pantheon of the gods, who some say are more than 70. A Hittite myth similarly mentions the 77 and 88 children of Ashura, so it kind of confirms more than 70 kids. Ugaritic and other Canaanite materials further associate Ashura with lions, indicating power, serpents representing immortality or healing, and sacred trees signifying fertility.
Fun fact. A Shorha snake on a stick representing healing is where we got the snakes for the universal medical logo.
So there's basically a ton of different symbols that basically relate back to Ashura, and she was the creator goddess or god, whatever. But anyways, if you're interested, I would suggest looking into it yourself. It's a ton of different information on her children, all of this, it all relates back to itself. So anyways, moving on to the next thing. Up next is the cromlech of Almedres. Located on the slopes of the Monte dos Almedres in Portugal is the ancient megalithic site of Almedres Cromlech, also popularly known as the Hill of the Stone Anamorphe. The stunningly well-preserved site is the most important megalithic arrangement in all of Portugal and is also believed to be one of the oldest stone circles throughout all of Europe. Almidres Cromulec, locally known as Cromulec dos Almidres, is located close to the city of Évora in the Alentejo region of Portugal. Despite being just a short distance from Évora, transport to the site is difficult, making it an unpopular destination for tourists. Consequently, this special site remains free and open to the public at all times. No fences or ropes keep visitors back, and it is possible to freely wander around the site and even touch the stones. A rare experience if you know what all these historical sites that I've been talking about is. Mostly they're roped off and they're all tourist locations. Almidres Cromulec is not just any megalithic site. Consisting of over 90 granite standing stones, it is the largest megalithic site in the Iberian Peninsula and is one of the largest in Europe as well. These stones are arranged in two twin circles. The ring to the east is circular in shape and the smaller of the two. It also contains the oldest stones, which have been dated to the early Neolithic period or somewhere around 6000 BC. The ring to the west, on the other hand, is elliptical in shape and is believed to have been built during the Middle Neolithic period around 5000 BC. It is believed that around 3000 BC, many of the stones were repositioned to align with the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Therefore, it has been speculated that the Almidres Cromulec may have functioned as some sort of astronomical observatory. For instance, if a line were to be plotted from the solitary Menhir of Almidres, which is a single granite monolith rising to a height of around 4.5 meters, to the center of Almidres Cromulec, it would point towards the sunrise on the winter solstice. Although there are trees in the way now, independent reports that the Neolithic builders of the site would have watched the sun rise over the left-hand monolith at the midsummer and then see it move gradually over 6 months to rise over the right-hand southerly monolith at midwinter. But still, like many of these other sites that I've talked about, the exact function of Almidres Cromulec is still a mystery, and we're basically just taking educated guesses at this point. But we're moving on to the next thing. Hope you like that one. Up next is Nitocris. For the past century, the history and overall existence of Nitocris has been questioned by scholars. Even though her name appears on the Turin King's list of Egyptian monarchs and is also mentioned by Manethello in his list of 6th century Egyptian monarchs, and by Eratosthenes of Cyrene in his Theban list of Egyptian monarchs, basically nobody can prove that this person was ever actually alive. Flavius Josephus references Herodotus' story in his Antiquity of the Jews, Book 8, Volume 6, calling her Nikaole, and does not question the authenticity of the tale. Eratosthenes' mention of Nitocris is also known through the work of Apollodorus of Athens, which is cited by Seneculus in his selection of chronography. Still, because there is no physical evidence of this queen, no inscriptions, no monuments, no tomb, nor any later reference to her, some scholars have claimed that her name is simply a scribal error of that of the last king of the 6th dynasty, Nitocris Sipta.
Is nothing but a tragic mistake.
Recently, however, an increasing number of Egyptologists and scholars have come to accept that Herodotus' account may have some basis in fact, and Nitocris is increasingly being recognized as the queen of the region of Egypt and the last monarch of the Old Kingdom. The underlying reason for this new evaluation of Nitocris is unclear, but may have to do with the kind of evidence first presented by the Egyptologist Percy E. Newberry, who argued that Nitocris was an actual Egyptian ruler and not just a character in a fable repeated by Herodotus, and that her history should be accepted. Although Herodotus' account of Nitocris is often cited as the only evidence of the queen in all of history, so if you want to believe she's real, you can. There's not really any real evidence for it though, so just in case. We're moving on to the next one though. Up next is the Lost Roman Legion in Leitien. The legend begins in 53 BC with the Battle of Carrhae between the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus and the Parthian general Surena. Carrhae was the location near the modern-day Syrian and Turkish border. In antiquity, it was near the fringes of the Roman Empire in the west and the Parthian Empire in the east. Crassus was already one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Republic, but he had a desire to access the wealth of the Parthians, so he convinced the Senate to let him lead 42,000 Roman soldiers into the battlefield against the Parthians. In the battle, Crassus and his army suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of Surena and his 10,000 archers. Crassus attempted to negotiate a truce, but was killed in the process. According to legend, liquid gold was poured down his throat as a punishment for his greed. He was also allegedly beheaded and his body was desecrated. They did work on this man. Like, they poured gold down his throat to shut him up. Like, that's some new levels of fucked up. I'm not even gonna hold you. Like, wow.
Why didn't you just shoot this asshole?
kind of blows my mind. Like, damn, you wasted gold on that. Of the surviving Roman soldiers, 10,000 of them were captured alive by the Parthians. According to some accounts, they were relocated to the eastern border of the Parthian Empire. It is Parthian custom to send prisoners of war captured in the west to the far east to secure their loyalty against their eastern rivals. 17 years later, in 36 BC, on the western border of the Han Chinese Empire, the Battle of Jiji was fought between the Chinese and the Huns, a classical enemy of China. Mercenaries fighting on the side of the Huns, who used a fish scale formation. The Chinese description of the fish scale formation used by the mercenary soldiers bears a vague resemblance to the testudo formation practiced by the Roman legions. This has led to the popular theory that these mysterious soldiers were in fact exiled Roman legionaries from the Battle of Carrhae, who had hired themselves out as mercenaries for the Huns. This idea was first suggested by the historian Homer Dubs. The fish scale formation impressed the Chinese, and they invited the soldiers to come back to China and become a part of the border guard in the modern Gansu province. A city and country were also made for them, which were named Lijian or Lijian. Dubs argued that some of the soldiers in exile gave up trying to go back to Rome and instead hired themselves out as mercenaries for local warlords in the region. Some of these former Roman soldiers may have found themselves working for the Huns in their war against the Chinese. Now, proponents of this theory have searched for Lijian and believe that they have found it. Zelzaihe is a modern village near Laoshu. What is interesting about the town is that the people living there have traits such as brown hair and blue eyes, which is strictly contrasting with the appearance of most of the people in the surrounding villages. Additionally, a helmet was reportedly found with Chinese characters written on it saying, "One of the surrendered." The appearance of the villagers and the discovery of unusual artifacts has led many believers in the legend to identify Zalzehai with Lijian. Because the legend has been popularized, the town has now used it to attract tourists, even going as far as to construct Roman-style buildings and statues. Since Rome and China were aware of each other in antiquity, it was believed to be possible to travel between the two empires at the time, but the evidence is not conclusive. So basically, there's no true definite evidence of this, but it is still possible. Like, they were around at the same time, they could have traveled, it's possible. We just don't have the exact evidence yet. But anyways, moving on to up next is the Siberian Ice Maiden. In 1993, Russian archaeologists discovered an intriguing find in the Yukok Plateau near the Russian-China border. They had got information about a grave robbery. Digging at the gravesite, they stumbled upon a giant block of ice. The team, led by Dr. Natalia Polishmak of Novosibirsk's Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography, began melting the block. They found the mummified body of a 25-year-old princess known as the Siberian Ice Maiden. Polishmak and her staff found the princess even had tattoos still remaining. As the archaeologists began to melt the ice with buckets of boiling water, they discovered harnesses, saddle pieces, and a table where a meal of fatty mutton had been kept for 2,500 years. The mutton was rotting and gave a foul stench. They also discovered 6 horses in total. The marks of pickaxes on their head had indicated that they were basically executed. They were killed. Then there was only more ice. The archaeologists worked painstakingly to melt the remaining ice and at last found some sable fur. When they removed the fur, a shoulder appeared with a brilliant blue tattoo of a magnificent griffin-like creature, in the words of Polishmak. It was the body of a young woman between 25 and 28 years old. She came to be known as the Yukok Ice Princess or Siberian Ice Maiden. Polishmak's team extracted the mummified body, which was in excellent condition. The archaeologists were unable to determine the cause of death because all of her internal organs, including her brain, had all been removed. But 2 decades after her discovery, experts at the Russian Academy of Sciences have an explanation. She most likely died of breast cancer. According to the MRI scans, Dr. Andriy Lechigin believes she developed breast cancer in her early 20s. The asymmetry in the MR signals from the scan, according to Dr. Lechigin, shows that she had a tumor in her right breast. The disease's excruciating pain worsened over time, weakening her. It is possible that she fell off of a horse, fracturing her bones not long before her death. She was in a lot of pain and apparently relied on cannabis to help her. The presence of cannabis in her grave is proof to this. High-ranking members of the Eurasian nomadic civilizations widely use cannabis. My guys, shout out to them. The Ice Maiden's skin remained intact, embalmed with herbs, grasses, and wool, according to Dr. Polishmak's team. The horses were sacrificed and buried alongside the princess. They dressed her in a silk top and a striped woolen skirt. As the highest ranking members of the nomadic societies wore silk, it is safe to assume that she was a princess. The Ice Maiden also had a cosmetics bag on her left hip, showing that she cared about how she looked. And tattoos, according to Polishmak, are a symbol of beauty. At least back then, the goal was to appear to be as gorgeous as possible. Because the tattoo was visible, she placed it on top of the shoulder to basically try to be as hot as possible, you know what I mean, as attractive as she could. The Ice Maiden had tattoos on both arms and fingers, but one of her, basically the one on her shoulder was the best preserved. Because of the animal style painting, archaeologists assume the princess was of Scythian heritage, as they have discovered similar artwork in various parts of Russia, Central Asia, and Europe. People in the area believed in shamans and regard that the removal of mummies from ancient graves was a terrible omen. Basically, they think that they just gave these guys a lot of bad luck. People in the Altai region where the mummy was discovered were outraged that she was being showcased to tourists from all over the world. Basically, they hated that possibly one of their ancestors was just on display for everybody to see and basically just being used as a trophy almost, which, I mean, I could definitely see why they would be upset about that, but end of the day, I mean, this is important research. You know what I mean? You want to know the answers to some of this stuff at some point, right? I would hope so. And the reason why they were mad is because they actually took the Ice Maiden to Korea and Japan, where she was treated like a rock star, basically, where the crowds surrounding her all over the place. And basically, authorities in the area where she was originally discovered reacted by prohibiting additional excavations, and they designated the area as a zone of peace. Russian authorities also eventually returned her to an Altai museum, but they're still studying it so we can further figure out stuff from her. But anyways, moving on to the last thing about this. Finishing up this iceberg is the Yonaguni Monument. The Yonaguni Monument is an enormous underwater rock formation that covers an area of 60 by 50 meters. It was first discovered in the mid-1980s by a scuba diver who was looking to observe hammerhead sharks. And since then, pseudo-archaeologists believe that it is a monolith carved by man thousands of years ago. The Yonaguni Island area is a popular scuba diving destination. Now, divers travel to explore the mysterious Yonaguni pyramid-like structure and its surrounding artifacts. It was actually by accident that Kichichiro Arataki discovered what some scientists call the archaeological find of the century. Isn't that what they call all these finds though? He discovered the mysterious find in 1986 while diving off the coast of Yowaguni-jima, searching for a new spot to view hammerhead sharks. However, he inadvertently strayed outside of the designated safety zone. In front of him laid a massive stone structure on the ocean floor at a depth of 35 meters. He explored the monument and was in awe at how colossal it was. Due to the heavy incrustation of the coral, it was difficult to determine exactly what it was. Being curious, he kept on circling it again and again, taking pictures before finally returning to shore. Some believe that the monument is a handmade pyramid structure bearing evidence of a lost civilization. It was even referred to as the Japanese Atlantis, which kind of sounds a little crazy. Masaki Kimura spent over 15 years studying the site. He is convinced that it is man-made, suggesting that ancient people once lived where it stands. It is said to be evidence of the lost continent of Mu, long since submerged since following a severe hurricane. During his many dives to the site, Kimura gathered substantial evidence that man, not nature, formed the ancient structure. He noted several specific artificial features that supported his theory. These features include marks from tools, a retaining wall, a suggestive road, so not really, but something I guess you could say is a road, drainage canals, gates, stairways, and 2 carved monuments that were shaped like turtles. Basically, his findings concluded with, "It is hard to believe nature would have left such a clear outline." That is in his words. Now, others say that the straight edges of the monument resulted from the natural stratigraphy of sandstones. These often will look like a straight line, straight enough to be human-made. And in fact, Robert Scotch, who is a math and science professor at Boston University, shout out Boston, he even dived the site and he stated that isolated portions of it may look like they're man-made, but when you look at it in context, you see how, in this case, fine sandstone split up along horizontal bedding planes that give you these regular features. Just like the lost city of Atlantis though, we may never know what actually happened here or how it got there, and any evidence found can only support speculation and often generates a counter-argument, so there's no clear answer to this. But, you know, if you ask Kimura, he swears it's man-made, and if you ask Scotch, he basically says, no, this is natural processes. So, believe what you want to believe. Personally, I don't really care. I hope we find out at some point, but hey, I'm not holding up about it. But anyways, okay, and that was it. The entire Ancient Mysteries iceberg, give or take the first 2 tiers. But anyways, I still covered a few of those in my lost locations. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you check it out. I linked it down below. Like I said before at the beginning of this, I know that was a while ago, but make sure you comment your favorite mystery or your favorite entry, or if you think that I missed something specific that you want me to cover, let me know down below, because I always comment back. I at least try to make sure I hit everybody back up. But anyways, appreciate y'all for watching. Yeah, stay safe, stay dangerous, and I'll catch y'all soon. Deuces.